Yeah, we're off. Hi, guys.
Have to be imposed.
Tinfoil hat. We go deep, homeboy. Aaron, open your mind. Drink from the fountain of knowledge. There's lizard people everywhere. That's some interdimensional shit. Wake up, Aaron.
This is only the beginning.
Dude, you just blew my mind.
Hey, Dan. Good to see ya.
Morning,
Hey,
Swan,
Bill,
and
good to see you,
welcome to
mate.
Tinfoil Hat. You know I am. You know I'm here too. I'm here too. Joining me as always.
These are the ones that they done them Greystoke tapes. I deleted them because they might be copyrighted, but I've been told they don't copyright. So they got some pretty interesting content.
Xavier Guerrero, and on the ones and twos, Jay Nice, Juicy Johnny, and Carl. Everybody. Yeah.
We figured out what Carl's up to this whole time. He's
Yeah, we
making
know.
memes.
Yes.
He's doing
He is
Russian disinformation.
collusion meme master, everybody. Meme magic Carl. That's what they call him back there.
That's why he's
That's how
busy, because they never stop making disinfo. They work while
Pushing
you're asleep.
disinformation. It is truly amazing. Hey guys, it's your boy, Sweet Sammy T here. Go to see samtripoli.com. Check out my dates. I want to jump off right out the gate and say, New Jersey, you never let me down. Fun times. Fun times. Well, guess what? More shows coming. Thousand Oaks. Bang. Buy a ticket. Please, somebody show up to my show. Thousand Oaks. Indianapolis. Then I'll be in St. Louis with Xavier Guerrero and my good friend Eddie Bravo. Then we'll be in I'm in Bellflower on November 10th, and we are in Austin and Dallas in November. More dates to come. Go to samfood.com. New T-shirts are up. I have some premium content coming. All that and more on samtripoli.com. So let's get into it. Joining us on his birthday, it was just his birthday. He's a fun, festive screen. He's going to tell us a little bit about us. You know him. He is the booker of Tinfoil Hat. He has a podcast called My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. It is his birthday, and he used that birthday as an excuse to be late. Please welcome Mark Steeves, everybody. How are you, Mark?
Hey, happy to be here. Happy to use my birthday as an excuse to be late and as an excuse to be a guest on the show because got some interesting stuff that I want to introduce to you hardworking gentlemen. As the booker of the show, you know, I'm always throwing some wacky guests at you guys, and sometimes they come out of left field. So
we love it. We love it. We love you.
We could sort of set the stage for some future episodes to come. But yeah, happy to be here.
Glad you're here, Mark. Explain your screensaver to us. When it first came on, I thought you were very pro-Palestine. I was like, this guy loves Palestine.
It's just an OBS screen that I thought looked cool. Now I'm totally rethinking it, and you probably will never see it again.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you right now. No, it's great.
If that's true, we did you a big favor. I can tell you that, buddy.
No. I think it's cool. It's definitely like, hey, dude, I got a fucking public access show from 1985. That's the vibe that I get right here. It's very nice, and I like it.
Yeah. It's like coming up later, Wayne's World.
This is how I usually appear on other people's shows, and now I'm starting to understand why I don't get a lot of invites back.
So. No. You're always welcome back, buddy. You're always welcome back.
I'm not going to use this moving forward, but
I mean, Xavier's is blurry. He's a blurry Mexican in this picture. It's fine. Nobody's perfect on this show. Nobody.
Exactly. Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's
really,
perfect.
No rhyme or reason. I just thought it looked cool. But yeah, that's out the window now. But anyways, we're going to be talking about Atlantis.
It looks great. It's your birthday. You can look however you want.
Oh, yeah.
Tomorrow,
you're right.
Tomorrow we're going to light you up. But today, it looks great, buddy. It looks
now you're
great.
revealing
Congratulations, your mom.
Yeah, this is why I want to be on the show on my birthday, because I know Sam will take it a little easier on me. But
I take it easy on you all the time. You guys don't understand the fights that happen in the text thread, and where I have to keep these two guys from going at it. But we'll get into that a little later. So, what do you want to talk about, Mark? First of all, Mark, for those who may not be familiar with you, which I find impossible, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where our guests can find you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have the podcast, as you pointed out, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, which was sort of put together around the same time I started working with Sam as a booker. So, yeah, I interview all sorts of crazy people. Some of them make their way to this show, some of them don't. And yeah, I've got tons of content available, whether you're on Rockfin or YouTube or really any audio platform. I just put out an episode today talking about UAPs. No comment on that subject, but yeah, there's my website. Probably also looks like a public access website.
Okay,
But,
that was a joke. We're having fun. You put together also a network. How's that network going?
Good. Slowly growing, surely, strongly. And we've got some new podcasts that just joined in. I got to make the pages for them very soon. But yeah, it's a free podcast cooperative, essentially a directory of conspiracy and strange podcasts.
How many are you up to?
We have over 100 now. And Apple, Spotify, they're never going to have a genre there or in the podcast section that says conspiracy or cryptid or whatever. So altmediaunited.com is a great place if you're into that kind of stuff to just go and check out a bunch of great podcasts like this one. Sam's shows are all listed on there, and the Union of the Unwanted and everybody who's a part of the Union of the Unwanted as well for the most part. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's great. You're doing great work, buddy. You're doing the Lord's work. So, what do you want to get into, dude? It's your birthday.
So, there's a few things that we're going to talk about today, and if you guys read the notes, which I'm guessing you didn't, you might have seen that. You did.
We
Okay.
did moments before you, while we were waiting for you to get here. Actually, we read the
Okay.
notes.
So, any of that stood out to you? Maybe the last paragraph.
Edgar
here's
Casey,
the thing,
I'm a big
Mark.
fan.
Here's the thing. The audience has not read the notes, so we like to present it up. We almost like to present it like we're just having a conversation.
Well, I want to give my thesis, and we'll get into it. So
Okay, let's do
basically, Atlantis is a real ancient civilization that once existed. There are remnants of it around the world, and there are a number of cultures that record events from these Atlantean times. And there's also people in modern times who have presented revelations, let's call it, about Atlantis that have proven to be true, whether through scientific or archaeological, work to prove such things. But some of the stories are too crazy to be proven, but worth talking about. Things like Atlantean sex hybrid factories, where they were creating basically all sorts of combinations of animal and human hybrids and then using them as slaves of all sorts of varieties. We have these really strange accounts of people channeling past lives as Atlanteans where they had sex with dinosaurs. So yeah, we're gonna get into.
I'm in. I got it. This is my jam. I love it. Anytime we can get into dinosaur sex, I'm like, we need to make this episode happen. It's very interesting. There's a lot of discussion about Atlantis and what it represents. What do you think is the biggest impact on why Atlantis is so important? Let's just say one day it just the holy grail of evidence comes out and we can pinpoint not only where Atlantis was, when it was. What do you think impact that would have?
Well, I think science is kind of making their way to this conclusion, but at a certain point in history, the big, impact that Atlantis carried with it was the idea that humanity isn't, only a couple thousand years old. For a long portion of time, we were given this idea that, the Earth is only a couple thousand years old, and even still today, people argue from a very fundamentalist biblical perspective that is the case. And I would argue that the Bible, in fact, was talking about something altogether different. I don't know how you feel.
What is that?
and all
What do
that.
you say? I know I'm open-minded to hearing this
But we're
because
gonna
it
get
is a
to
big
we're gonna
discussion.
get to we're gonna get to that today.
Okay. All right.
But basically, what I'm proposing is that Atlantis is this actual civilization that fills in the gap that we have in archaeology. So, archaeologists, academia today, they have this big gap between when civilization came about and when humans came about. There's just this time frame there where, oh yeah, we were just hunter gatherer, dimwit Neanderthal types, so living in caves and doing that kind of thing. Most of the leading researchers in this realm of alternative history agree that that is bogus. I mean, you guys have had plenty of people on the show to talk about all the ancient sites that push the calendar back further and further, push the timeline back further and further. Globeki Tepe is an example of one of the oldest sites that we've found. And funny enough, before a lot of these, scientific discoveries were made, people like Edgar Sayce were prophetically giving information that pointed to this. And given that he was illiterate, and we'll get into all of the other interesting aspects about Edgar Sayce in a bit.
It's Edgar Casey, not Edgar Spacey.
But given the
The
fact
sleeping
that
prophet, he done a
like,
big
read
thing
any of
about
this stuff
Atlantis.
during his lifetime, it's completely like stupefying to think that not only did he predict and espouse information that at that time wasn't verified, now is. Not only did he make those, we can call them predictions, I prefer to call them revelations, because Edgar Sayce believed in God, he believed in Christ. And part of my theory is that Jesus is of course a prophet. I'm not here to tell anybody that their beliefs are wrong, but I think that there's a continuation of prophecy that goes beyond Jesus. Obviously, there's a whole conversation about the angel Gabriel and Muhammad and that. I'm not here to talk about that, but when it comes to America, there's this whole side of American history that's been left out. You guys talked to Avery Warner a couple episodes ago, and she mentioned Joseph Smith and how he cooked up this whole thing with the golden tablets. Well, one thing that she left out, I don't think she left it out on purpose, it just wasn't important to her thesis, but the mounds are where Joseph Smith got these golden tablets from. And I think that is really important, and we'll get to why that's really important and why I think that these Nephilim dark forces that we've talked so much about on the show as of late are actually this fallen group of Atlanteans who messed around with incredibly dark arts and are still somehow disincarnate on the planet, trying to manipulate events, and maybe even are responsible for these major powers coming to America and creating this empire here. So, and possibly that's also why they don't want to acknowledge Atlantis as a real place, because it would lead people back to these dark forces that are controlling humanity to this day. So
super interesting. Super interesting. So your thoughts are that maybe these entities aren't fallen angels, that maybe they're just Atlanteans. Is that your theory?
No. I think fallen angel and Atlantean could very well just be the two different descriptions of the same being. I'm not discounting one or the other.
Okay, this is good then. So he understands that they're fallen angels, like Apollo and all that.
I think, it's just a matter of perspective, right? So we have different cultures talking about what seems like the same events, right? We've established that the flood was recorded by all these different cultures. Even geologists have found evidence that the flood, washed across the Midwest, and there's this huge, flat piece of the layer of geology where you can see a flood actually happen. So, that kind of idea is been established pretty thoroughly. But no, I think that, yeah, whatever these beings were, they're probably humans in the past that did very evil things, and it caused God to punish them and destroy their cities and flood the earth, as we're told in the Bible, right? So, and maybe that's how we remember it now. Maybe it's a little bit more nuanced, a little more complicated than that. Maybe it's God philosophically did this to them and not actually did this to them. Maybe it's like what we see in Star Wars, where we learn morals like evil ultimately corrupts people, and that corruption can't sustain itself, right? So I think that's more or less what we see with Atlantis. But let's get to my little presentation here, and I'll show you guys exactly how this all started.
I'm in, dude. Let's go.
Cool. All right, so let me just hit slideshow, and then I'll share my screen. And you guys let me know when you can see that.
There it is.
There it is.
Perfect. All right, so what you guys are looking at right here is a very interesting stone that I personally found. My girlfriend was with me as well. If I don't say that, she'll literally kill me. But we found this bird stone in Connecticut, of all places. In my whole life, like, I've learned about Atlantis and all these weird civilizations, but I never thought like my home state had anything to do with it, right? And I still am not 100% sure that this is Atlantean, but you'll see why I'm bringing this up later on. Essentially, we stumbled upon a giant stone that, I mean, you be the judge of what it's shaped like. It's clearly shaped really odd. It almost looks like it has a finger coming off one end of it. And I started calling it a bird stone because it looks like a bird.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. What's your girlfriend's name again?
Tara.
Tara.
Shout out to Tara.
Shout out to Tara. Yes, this is definitely.
We found this.
If you describe it to the listeners who are listening that don't see the video.
Yes, so this
Looks a bit like a duck. If you look to the left, it looks like a duck face.
picture is of a massive stone. I could actually stand on top of it. It's about 6 feet wide and a couple feet, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, and it's sitting on top of another boulder in this sort of clearing of overgrown weeds. So we found this next to a standing stone, which is just a very tall stone propped up in the ground. And this site happens to be in alignment with this line of ancient stone structures that an author named Glenn Kreisberg wrote about. And his theory is that these stone markers were some sort of ancient path that led to these very, very old copper mines that are now in the Great Lakes area in the United States. I think it's called the Kinesiwa Peninsula in Michigan, where they found over 5,000 mines. So these stone structures are kind of like, I don't know, pointing the way there. And it just happens to intersect with my state. And that is something you can see here on this little map. It goes all the way up to Michigan there and Wisconsin. And yeah, it's very, very strange that, all of this stuff, for the most part, is written about by authors who get published, by spiritual publishing companies. It's like, this isn't like academic stuff. This is relegated to the fringes of history and that sort of research. But lo and behold, synchronicity had it that we found this stone, and I had never seen it, talked about in any books. So I began into this subject and found all these other stone structures that are accounted for, but still, like, people for the most part don't really know who built them, and the Native Americans themselves are like, yeah, we didn't build all of these. They did work with some stone, but for the most part, they have legends of giants building them. So
Mark, you have to name that thing so it becomes official, like the Mark Steeves Summit or
Birdstone.
The Mark Steeves Birdstone.
I would be a little more humble than that, and maybe let somebody who lives in the area do that. But I appreciate
and someone must have placed that, because it's on top of 3 other stones, right? Like,
right. Oh, this one right here. Yeah. This one I didn't discover. This has like a
Diane, these mass shootings, they're so common now that they don't even make the news overseas unless it's something like 30 dead. That's how common it is now. Everyone's been desensitized to this. It's just getting worse, like
sign next to it that the town put there. This is in North Salem, New York, and you can see me in the shadow standing next to it. It's massive compared to to me right there.
And Mark is 7'2".
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm not 7'2". I'm close.
Mark is pretty tall.
You're pretty much in that form.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
Mark is our resident Nephilim. He speaks for the group.
So yeah, that's essentially maybe a reason why I'm interested in this stuff.
Now, real quick, Mark, you have on the screen basically 3 different images. One looks like an old time image, like somebody drew it. The bottom looks like a map, and then on the left is a blurry satellite picture, like NASA showing us Mars. What are these 3 pictures that you're showing us right now?
So you're getting 3 different scales. So the blurry NASA looking picture is the site on Google Earth zoomed in all the way, and I'm basically showing you with that green line how the Hammonasset line intersects with this site. And then I expand to the Connecticut, which is the older map up top on the right hand corner, and that is another rendering of the Hammonasset line going through the region, and then down in the bottom right-hand corner, you see the line going through the northeast and northern part of the United States. So it's basically just a scale to 3 different scales of the same line. And this is
Were
just
those the copper mines that you showed us? Was that the
exactly
weird stones?
So at the Great Lakes sort of nexus point in the center here, there's a place called Saint Sue Marie or Sault Sainte Marie. That's one of the like spots on this line, and just to the west of that are where all those copper mines are. So yeah, basically what I'm showing you is remnants of this ancient culture here in the United States.
Hey guys, let me tell you about our friends James McMahon and Copy My Crypto. Let me tell you about Copy My Crypto. Guys, listen, we've seen so many people making ridiculous money from crypto, but did you know you could do the same? The Copy My Crypto membership site shows you the coins that YouTuber James McMahon personally holds and allows you to copy them. It's like having a big brother who knows what he's doing. You don't need to know a thing about crypto or how to invest, as you simply do what he does. So let me tell you more about James. He runs Crypto with James YouTube channel, which despite heavy censorship has over 26,000 subscribers. Since March 2020, he told his viewers to buy 26 crypto coins. Had you put $100 in each of those coins, it went up to be worth $123,000. Of the 26 coins, his top pick of the year, a coin called Phantom, went up 692 times from when he said. That one call alone retired a number of people, including guys in their 20s and 30s. Remember, this is public knowledge. You can go to YouTube and verify this yourself. So if you'd like to join the 2,800...
I don't trust any of that cryptocurrency at all.
2,800 members who copy James, then stop what you're doing and head right over to copymycrypto.com/TFH. That's copymycrypto.com/TFH. That's TFH. You'll not only find proof of everything I say, but my listeners get full access for just $1.
Stone chambers, some of them are aligned to different
Have you
constellations.
gone in them?
Yeah, I've been inside one of them, and it was an interesting experience. There are some researchers who have brought vault mediums to these sites and found that there's an
Lisa, can you shut the door, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
magnetic anomalies in certain areas near the sites. So you have to wonder, what were the ancients or whoever built these doing with these sites, and the fact that they've remained, is a testament to this culture's, skill and ability to construct things. Now, this is just kind of the 101 on why I got interested in it. Now, just recently, I found this book that we're going to be learning a bit from. It's called Visions of Atlantis by Michael LaFlemme. It just came out this year, and planning on having him as a guest on this show, so maybe we could have him on to go deeper with you guys about certain things that we don't get to touch on today. But everybody's heard of Atlantis, especially if you've gone to school of any kind. They'll tell you about Plato, and they might even mention Atlantis and tell you it's some sort of, fantasy fiction, and it was just this sort of platform for Plato to put some of his ideas out there. And what we're going to basically explore is how not only did Plato write about this place, but countless other reputable people from history have written about Atlantis, and they weren't sourcing Plato. They, in most of these cases, are existing before Plato. So, you have to ask yourself, why has academia had so much of a problem with this Atlantis Plato story? They've gone to such great lengths to dismiss this and say, no, Plato was just fiction. There's nothing there. And if you guys remember, the last time I was on the show, which I don't believe it, you would, that was a long time ago, but we kind of explored this idea that
Passive aggressive.
Yeah, that was so fast.
That was so
I know you guys, I listen to every episode, but anyway, so if you remember that last episode, and listeners go back and...
When was that? 1850? What year was that? Was Xavier allowed through the front entrance, or did he have back entrance into the studio?
Yeah, well, we were talking about that time period. So, yeah, and it was that episode that I talked about the university system and the corruption.
Oh, yeah.
And how there's these secret societies that are at the foundation of the United States, and all of these, systems that we take for granted as authority actually have these very weird, occult sort of behind the shadow operators, right? And I think Plato and the Atlantis story is an example of where academia gives you this sort of like right in your face kind of truth, right? They tell you about Atlantis, but then they tell you it's just a made up story. And from then on, people live their life dismissing this notion that there were advanced civilizations in the past. And I think this bias that academia has generated has done us as a humanity a great disservice, because there are countless artifacts across the United States that just go, undiscovered and uncared for, like these stone chambers. They just get covered with leaves every year, and a couple people write books about them, and some people go on hikes and visit them, but it's not like the state has like a sign saying, oh, this is the official history of this place, like you would at like a Civil War battlefield or any other historical notable place, right? So
yeah, we see that a lot with anything that is like that allows us to maybe know that would change the way we see ourselves in this universe. They like to change timelines. Their whole thing is we're monkeys. We're just talking monkeys on a speck of shit, flying through the air, all this crazy stuff. So it's interesting to me. It's very interesting on who. We see it happening in real time right now with cultural Marxism, them just like taking down all these statues, lying to us about Civil War, lying to us about slavery, creating a narrative, all this stuff. It's like, yeah, this totally makes sense to me.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is the world we live in. Constantly, we're made to guess what's true and what's fake, and I wouldn't be surprised if some skeptical people see that we're talking about Atlantis and say, oh, this is going to be a bunch of hot chaff, and that's totally fine. That's totally fine.
Hot what?
Hot chaff. It's like separate the wheat from the chaff. Chaff is like a bunch of bullshit. But,
thank you for that. Yeah. Oh, now you swore. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Oh, are we in the
first? No, we're not. I was just joking. Go on.
All right. So, Plato didn't just make this story up, as I just kind of pointed out. He got this story from a established line of people, as you can see here on this little chart. Socrates, who he writes about, heard the story from Critias, who heard it from his grandfather, who heard it from a friend of Solon,
heard it from a friend
who heard it from an Egyptian priest.
Right.
And
And they-
from another
about-
universe of realm. This
Yeah.
is like, the original game of telephone in ancient times with Atlantis, right? And
What do these numbers represent, Mark?
so the first two names have dates over their names to tell you when they're alive, and then the other guys, I just gave up because it was too hard to find Dropity. I couldn't find where Dropity's what his thing was, so I just gave up. But anyways,
So number three. Number 3, 4,
That's
5,
great.
6,
By the
7.
way, Dropities is the best MC name ever, right?
it's so good. Dude.
That's
It's
so
so
much.
good.
Dropities! What's up? Eminem! Dropities! Dropping a new hot lit joint real quick. That's the fact. And like, the more things change, the more they're exactly the same.
Exactly, and I dropped the ball at Dropities, but yeah. Sankis is this Egyptian priest, right? And he's talking to this Solon, who eventually passes the story all the way down to Plato of Atlantis, but he's telling him about Atlantis like at the end of Atlantis's basically civilization. So it's like telling someone about Rome and only describing the last 5 years of Rome, right? It's like, well, by that summary, you'd think Rome was a hunk of shit, but no, they were one of these huge conquering empires that obviously fill libraries with books about them. So we don't need to spend much time talking about Rome. But I think the same is true with Atlantis, where we only get this really small sliver of the historical account from a time when Atlantis was really at its end. But many other cultures mention Atlantis. Egypt has the Turin's King list, which Matt LaCroix has talked about on this show. And they list 10 kings that ruled what they called Ulitian or Oritian. And they basically give the date 9,600 BC. Plato gives the date 9,850. So yeah, we got a bunch of dates that we're gonna talk about, maybe a few more, but keep those two in mind. So let me get back to where I was here, scrolling too far ahead. Here it is. So then we have the Karna Parva, which is in the Mahabharata, which also describes this 10-year war at the end of which the island of Atala and all of its inhabitants sank into the Western Ocean. Okay, so now
Okay, I never knew that India backs up Atlantis. Wow, this is interesting.
Egypt and India both talking about Atlantis, right? Now we have.
What is this war? Do you know what the war was?
Well, it's exactly what we've talked about on the show, not with me, but with other guests, where these Nephilim, these Titans had these battles before the flood, right? I mean, it's the same story that we're getting from the Bible, just from a different perspective and maybe in fragments, right? So think about it in terms of that. And once we get to the Edgar Sayce readings, a lot of this stuff is going to start to make a lot more sense, I promise.
Well, it's like I've said 1,000 times on the show, Godzilla was a documentary. I've said it, I'll say it again.
Well, and
Godzilla was a
crazy
documentary.
part, man, because these Atlanteans were literally creating hybrid monsters, and we'll get to that. But yeah, it's Godzilla. It's actually Godzilla. So Solon, who gave the story to Plato, he had a whole poem about Atlantis that's been lost to time, and people guessed that maybe what Plato heard was just a small portion of that. Then we have back to India, the Ramayana also mentions.
Oh, real quick, I hate to stop you, but how do they know he had a poem, and how do they know what part of that he listened
Good question.
to? I'm just wondering.
Well, we know Solon had a poem because it's written about. We don't have the poem itself. And we know that because Plato heard the story from Solon, we'd have to guess that maybe, this is researchers looking at the case and making the assumption that maybe Solon gave Plato a piece of this bigger poem. Or maybe what Plato had was all there was in the poem. I mean, there's no reason to take this all as fact, right? We need to have a level of suspicion here, because remember, this is all stuff that's comes from a long time ago. Who knows what the the ancients were really talking about. My angle is to come about this or approach this with a more open mind, because it seems like academia has this overly skeptical mindset when it comes to anything even remotely related to Atlantis. So uh, essentially, and we don't have to read every single point, but the point here is that we have more records of Atlantis beyond Plato. Okay, and it's not just from people in Greece; it's from people in India and Egypt, even on the island of Lesbos.
Where is the island of Lesbos? Can we do a tinfoil hat comedy night there?
You probably can.
Hey, well, good to see you.
Best comedy crowd or worst comedy crowd ever? The island of Lesbos?
I think that island is in Greece, by the way.
Of course it is.
It is in Greece, and I think you're going to get a lot of chicks shouting things and walking out.
It's beautiful, though.
They all listen to Fortune Finster's new podcast that's like #1 in the world.
Yeah, that podcast is crushing it on them.
Yeah, they're crushing it. It's good for them. Fortune deserves everything that she's getting. She's the nicest human being on planet Earth. She is the most lovable person I've ever met. So good for her.
All right, glad we got that.
Shut up.
It's the same. It's just he loves complimenting comedians.
We got that obligation.
He's so afraid
in there. Can't mention the comedian's name.
Well, it's like she's the one person that I just love her so much. I wouldn't want her to ever think I was fucking talking smack.
No, she's good people.
Nobody
is. She's great.
People. Here's the thing, Sam. People aren't as paranoid as you are. You are easily misunderstand things other people say as insult. Other people, most of them aren't like that.
Most people, they listen to the show and they think you're crazy, Sam. Why do you care what they think in the first place?
Well, I know that, but I don't want. I listen. I always tell people this. I'm crazy. I'm not an asshole.
Right.
There's a big difference.
Right. Well, a lot of people thought Plato was crazy. 360 BC Athens, that's when he gave this Atlantis account that's become so famous and such a hotly debated topic in academia. Like, you could seriously get kicked out of university for even mentioning this in certain time periods, right? So very controversial.
So the students were assholes back then too, right? They were blue-haired jerks. Don't you mention Atlantis? Oh my God, where's my safe space?
Yeah.
There we go. I got this safe space.
Yeah, well, and it was all men back then in school, so imagine how bad those haircuts were.
Rightly so, I would say. Yeah, go
Yeah, let's get back to that. Am I right, everybody? Repeal 19. That's the new name of the show. It should be called Repeal the 19.
Thanks, Ryan. You're good people too.
All right, so Aristotle, Plutarch, other very notable people that academia loves. They love to, beat it to Aristotle. They love Aristotle so much, yet they won't even acknowledge the fact that he too mentions the sea being shallow, owing to the mud, but calm, for it lies in a hollow, which is just a fancy way of saying there was once a place here that sank into the ocean. And if you go today and look up the Sargasso Sea, you'll find out that the Atlantic Ocean has this weird anomaly where there's this spot in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean where there's an incredible amount of plants growing. I don't see kelp and other plants that grow really close to the surface of the water, so much so that ships can't even make it through. And in ancient times, or not ancient times, but in the past 500 years, during the age of exploration, they couldn't navigate it. It was like mud, right? So maybe that's because there was some sort of cataclysm that made this island sink. We'll get to that in a little bit. But essentially we have all these people talking about Atlantis in ancient times. One of the most interesting accounts of Atlantis comes from the Vishnu Purana, which mentions a white island across the salty sea in the west, inhabited by sun-worshipping Magas, a Sanskrit word quite similar to the Latin magus. They were definitely not Trump supporters, but they were Magas. they also called this place Atala. So again, we have this very similar thing going on with, Atlantis, Atala, XG. You might know this, Aztec, Aslan. Like there's this same thing going on in Mexico. There's a ton of places in Mexico with that same name, Atala. And even in the Canary Islands, there's a town named La Atala. Yeah, a lot of Oz in that last word. But anyways, Constantine, Sam, you should know who this is, had a vision, right? We all know about how Christianity came to Rome and then Rome started Christianizing all these places. Well, this is sort of like the beginning of the end of people remembering about Atlantis, right? After this happens and Christianity starts to conquer Europe and the rest of the world, people, for the most part, forget about a lot of things, including Atlantis. And it's not until, the age of exploration that we hear people or see people starting to talk about these ideas again. But I should point out that in the Dark Ages, which are called the Dark Ages for many reasons, scientists have found out that what people were saying back then was not myth. They used to think that the Dark Ages had all these myths about the sun being dim and the sky being dark, and scientists have found out that's actually true. There were these, sort of climatic events that made it so that the summers were very, very short for 2 years in 536 AD and I think 535 AD. So, given what is his name, Ian Ferguson talked about on Tinfoil Hat with like the Yuga cycles and all this stuff,
Yeah,
we can start to think like
he's great.
maybe Atlantis is this, golden age. We see its fall, and now we're in this dark ages, the Kali Yuga, and as we kind of go through all this craziness now in the modern world, we have this hope that, well, this is sort of the end of the bad times, because look how long ago these dark ages started. So that's kind of part of what I wanted to say.
2 guests ago, she's talking the Dark Ages also has to possibly do with something to do with, Jesus, right? And like he maybe lived longer than anybody thought, and those are the years that they got rid of, like some weird, crazy stuff with that too.
There's some really interesting theories about like Tartary and how they, changed the dates, and the J is actually an I and all this stuff. And I that's over my head. I would love to find the right guest to talk about that on the show, but I have no response to that, Sam. But JT was a great guest, and a lot of what he said inspired me to talk about this, because for a moment last week I was like, nobody wants to hear about Atlantis. I'm going to talk about werewolf attacks, and I almost put this whole
not against that either.
together about werewolf attacks. So maybe we'll do one werewolf story at the end. But
I'm all about that.
But I wanted to kind of bring this up because Avery Warner kind of touched on this theme. JT touched on this theme, that there are these dark forces that people have been trying to make sense of. And I'm starting to think maybe we have evidence for them in Atlantis. So let's skip past the historical nerd dork stuff. Johnny, don't worry for this episode. I'm the nerd dork of the show. So
there was never any doubt about that, Mark.
I know.
Thank you for saying.
I know. You're more like a sports nerd. I'm more like the kind of nerd that has books in his room. So yeah. Anyways,
well,
Johnny's a nerd.
I completely received your insult, and I reject it.
Nerd fight.
Revenge of the nerds.
We'll get into some JFK nerd fight. Hey, real quick, I want to tell you about American Hero, our good friends at Blue Chew. Let me tell you about Blue Chew. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in a chewable tablets at a fraction of the cost, okay? You can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or whenever an opportunity arises, because when she says it's go time, you better go and take no time, okay? You can take them anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be buying them, guys.
stuff. And
No. Who's that guy? I saw Jesuits. What is that?
no, we're not going to skip him. Don't worry. So we skip past some Spanish guys that when they went to the New World, they're like, whoa, I think we're in Atlantis, right? And that's kind of interesting because Atlantis wasn't, again, really talked about for a long time at that point in history. But then we have this Jesuit scholar who is possibly one of the world's first Egyptologists, because back then people didn't really know much about Egypt nor care to study it. So he went out and he's found some things in the Vatican Library that made a lot of sense to them, namely this Atlantis map. So this little map you see here, if you can imagine it kind of flipped over upside down, where America's on the right side of the map and Africa and Europe are on the left side of the map. It's kind of inverted in that way. But essentially what they're showing you here is that Atlantis was somewhere in front of America as it pertained to travelers from Europe and Africa. You'd have to pass through Atlantis to get it to America. And clearly we have evidence of them knowing about America before Columbus. I talked about that a bunch on the last time I was here, and how this whole Columbus story is loaded with propaganda and myth. And maybe that's because they're trying to cover up this ancient civilization that it seems like maybe the Native Americans, maybe some of these South American cultures like the Olmecs and the Mayans and the Incas, that they are survivors of this Atlantean culture. But all that aside for now, Athenius Kircher has this map that he finds allegedly in the Vatican Library. A lot of people don't give this map any credit at all, but it's interesting to note that Kircher was also interested in the inner earth or hollow earth theory at a time when nobody else was talking about that. And he wrote about giant skeletons found in caves in Europe. So
yeah, dude, there's definitely some. I am convinced that all the dinosaurs that they say they find are really Nephilim. That's
the thing that we're going to get to in a bit with the whole Atlantean dinosaur fuckers. Is like, maybe our idea of dinosaurs is so skewed and twisted around and full of propaganda because they're trying to cover the fact that humans.
Wait, sorry. Are you saying that dinosaurs were actually really fuckable? Is that what you mean by that? Like they're...
So there are channelers who have channeled Atlantean past lives where they had interacted with dinosaurs of different species.
No, I heard you say that, but your suggestion is that maybe dinosaurs were kind of hot, is the idea.
No. These
The
Atlanteans
dinosaurs were sentient. That's what he's saying.
basically genetically engineered the dinosaurs to be hot. Okay?
Well, Johnny, you know what scientists do. The minute they make something, they try to figure out how to stick their dick in it, right? That's the
I wasn't actually aware of that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's all they do. That's all they do. It's like, hey, I invented this. Oh, hey, dude, I can see my dick right here. That's what they do. That's all they do, bro.
Sam's got a point. And yeah, that's what we hear from a lot of these accounts, is that people have experienced in past lives in Atlantis these very, sexual deviant activities where they were fornicating with all sorts of hybrids, and they had, seems like, the choice to, select like, maybe a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a Brontosaurus or whatever. Maybe
it's basically cosplay. They basically were like, you know how chicks dress up like.
And Michael Leflem, the author, makes the point that like today you have these furries and these other kin people who think they're animals and they want to have sex with animals, which borders in some disgusting illegal realms. But this is part of what people, unbeknownst to them, like we'll get to this, but Edgar Cayce, when he would give readings, like he would falsely give people readings. They would be like, yeah, I'm here for my bad back. And he's like, well, in a past life, you had sex with Diplodocus, and now your fourth chakra is out of whack. Your back hurts from that. And this guy, he's just a dude from 1930s Kentucky, and he's like, well, this guy said I fucked it nine.
Dude, the shit women put up with.
Edgar Casey is the most entertaining story. Like all the crazy shit with around that guy. It's so fascinating.
So let's get to Edgar Casey because I want to talk about him. There's also another guy who channeled it.
It's not Edgar Stacy, it's Edgar Casey. He's this big expert on Edgar Casey, and he can't even say his name right.
Really interesting book that we're going to talk about as well. But essentially, this theory that I'm putting together, it's not my own. It's part of this book that I haven't read, but I've heard about. The reason I haven't read it is because it's like $200 online. So if anybody listening to this has a copy,
What?
get in touch with me.
The one
Why
right
is it
there.
so expensive?
Yeah,
The dark eyes.
this book, for I don't know why, is so expensive. And basically, what they talk about in this book is this exact theory that I'm laying out: is that these ancient beings have been on the planet. They manipulate humanity. They appear to us in all sorts of different forms, and they're behind a lot of the corrupt elements of humanity. And again, this Atlantean Edgar Sayce reading kind of sheds light on some of this, but before we get to him, let's talk about Frederick Spencer Oliver. So he wrote a book called A Dweller on Two Planets. Now, what's interesting about this guy is he grew up in California in the 1800s. He was born in 1866, and he was out in the Wild West. At some point in his teenage years,
See you
he
later.
gets this compulsion to start writing. And you got to keep in mind, he didn't go to school at this point in time. He probably wasn't like very well read. But he just starts writing, and he writes this whole manuscript, and then he dies very shortly at the age of 33. He dies and never sees his book published. He just kind of shoved his papers in his desk, and after he died, his mother organized them and published them into this book. And what he talks about in this book is, I mean, it's incredible to think that somebody in the Wild West of California in the 1800s could write something that reads like a Star Wars adventure. Like it literally reads like a crazy sci-fi fiction. So let me just read what he says. And this is the only thing he says. And then the rest of the book is written by this entity that comes through and automatic writes through him. So he says, in these days of doubt, materialism, and even rank atheism, it requires all the courage I possess to assert in clear, unequivocal terms that the following book, A Dweller on Two Planets, is absolute revelation, and I do not believe myself its author, but that one of those mysterious persons, if my readers choose to so consider him, an adept of the arcane and occult in the universe, better understood from reading this book, is the author. Such is the fact the book was revealed to me, a boy and a boy too, whose parents were mistakenly lenient to such a degree that he was allowed to do as he chose in most things, not lacking in inclination to study, but very lacking in willpower, continuity, and energy. I gained little in educational triumphs and was pointedly criticized by my teacher as lackadaisical, even lazy. Hence, when
Diane, see they started flooding the tunnels in Palestine? The Jews have already started flooding the tunnels. It doesn't look like they're going to stop until they level Palestine, does it? And you can't blame them. And notice that, yeah, I'll shut up now.
past 17 years of age, Philos, the esoterist, took me actively in
Yep.
charge, designing to make me his instrument of the world. That profound adept showed what seems to me a rare faith, for I was without any solid education, as generally so considered, was minus any special religious training.
Yeah, everyone's getting stuck in Israel for what they're doing to the Palestinians, but in the meantime, they're still firing rockets into Israel. But no one's bringing that up.
And for my sole commendation had willingness, love, and remarkable and uncolored mind. So in this very flowery, poetic 1800s sort of style, he says, I didn't write the book. This entity came through to me, and it actually kind of ruined my life because he didn't do good in school. His parents were like, what are you doing? You know, you're not hanging out with other kids. You're sitting in your room writing all day. Like, what are you writing about, right? And he didn't know what he was writing about. This was all channeled information. And, channeling runs the gamut of weird, right? There's totally like people who channel who I wouldn't trust. But what's interesting about this, and a lot of people don't point this out because I think the Christianity aspect turns certain people off that are attracted to this material for whatever reason. But throughout the book, he talks about Christ and he talks about Jesus and how this is like an enlightened channeling and it's in line with God's teaching. Like this isn't some kind of devil trick. And maybe the skeptical people would say, well, that's the first thing the devil's going to say is that, oh, I'm God, right? But it is interesting that it has this sort of Jesus-y message in a sort of, again, Star Wars kind of setting. So anyways, let's read a little bit about this guy.
That's so weird, bro. I would love to have channelers on here. Some weird ass channelers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we could do it.
Doesn't matter, Sean. He will stand with Israel right to the very end.
So
channel some shit. And then I want XG to ask some questions in really bad English and see the channel. Oh, what the fuck is it?
I think you'd have to know. She'd have to know, and that better get channeled back to me in English, in Spanish.
I think
That'd be nice. Or Latin. What about Latin? Can they channel it in Latin?
That'd be so hilarious.
I think
That'd
there
be
are bilingual channelers out there that could fill that need for you, XG. So yeah, Philos is this entity that comes through Frederick. Okay, Frederick is this young guy out in the Wild West of California, and what he's writing is this story of Philos's former life, his past life in Atlantis. So according to Philos, this teacher that writes through Frederick, he was once named Zyme, luminous of Querdno Aru, whatever the hell that means. And he allegedly lived in the 112th century BC. So keep in mind, that's 112,000 years before Christ, okay? A long, long time ago. And he says, as a young Poseidon prospector, Poseidon is like the area that they live in, Zyme strikes a motherlode of gold with his mining team and soon finds himself drawn to the capital city of Kaiful, Queen of the Wave, the mighty and awe-inspiring royal seat of the island's beneficent ruler, Rai Guaolin, and the home of some 2 million proud citizens. Here he attends the university, befriends the king, and applies to serve in government. He attains the rank of Astika, which is a prince, and is eventually sent in an airship/submersible called a Valix. He's a royal emissary who flies to Ganges, the capital of Cern, a foreign, gloomy region near modern-day India, ruled by mystical adepts. En route in his swift aluminum airship, which is equally equipped for deep voyages, he receives his diplomatic orders from the capital via his Nime, or handheld mirror-like communication device in which holographic forms of friends and advisors appear. Keep in mind,
Man, that sounds exactly like a cell phone.
he's writing this in 1880, okay? Smartphones weren't even like a gleam in someone's imagination back then. And he's describing what's this
100% Shawnee. Doesn't matter what they do, we've got to stand by Israel.
essentially a smartphone. Rai Guaolin reminds him to represent with great care and tactfulness his Atlantean culture to their one-time mortal enemy, who now have reached such high occult prowess that even the Atlantean Valix fleet and its advanced weaponry stands no chance. So remember how before we were talking about how India records these wars with this ancient place? Here they're saying, yeah, you're going over to India and be careful. They're our enemies.
They're shady, bro.
Yeah, so we already kind of see the politics of 112,000 years ago.
Great. The Atlanteans and the Hindus are popping off.
Right. Well,
Never ends.
Never ends, dude. Never ends.
So at some point, Zyme, which sounds a lot like Zavi, if you ask me, falls in love with two extraordinary Rhaenys princesses, the bold, cunning Lalix, his mistress from the region of Sald, and the alluring and philosophical Anzumi, his Poseidon bride-to-be. Both women were refined, intelligent, and both were beautiful, though of types as widely variant as blush rose and white lily. He talks to both of them on his cell phone, forever worried one of them might catch him chatting with the other, and helps Lala
Man, that sounds exactly like a cell phone. Wow. These are ancient texts, apparently, or 1800 texts.
get an apartment far across town where he occasionally spends the night. So he's an Atlantean playboy.
Holy shit! When did this come out?
In the 1880s, bro. They're talking
No
about, you know,
way.
Yeah, dude, he's on his phone running game on both of them, hoping that one doesn't find his fucking phone. That's incredible.
Right. So this is, I mean, this is kind of astounding stuff, considering, you know, what's being talked about. And he goes on to talk about some of his adventures in greater detail and how they fly over what is now present day Brazil, and they see the Amazon River, which at that point in time had all this agriculture going on. Well, sure enough, not too long ago in 2004, some scientists figured out that the Amazon River basin was at one point in time a massive agricultural operation unlike anything else in the world. So, you know, here's one of many things that comes about in these revelations that ends up being true. And I have a list here of some of his revelations. So, Philo states that in his time, people of Atlantis flew around in these airships, right? We have those today. Um, they did not have them in the 1800s, although there were sort of precursor sightings to UFOs. They called them, you know, mysterious airships. So the idea was around back then, but in the 1880s, most people had never seen a plane with their own eyes, let alone a silver, sleek airship, right? So uh, the communication device we talked about. He also mentions the dry seabed, now known as Lake Bonneville, that stretches across present-day Salt Lake City, Utah, as well as parts of Nevada and Utah, or I think that's supposed to say Idaho. But yeah, again, scientists have found out that at one point in time there was once a huge, you know, body of water in that area that was not commonly known when this book was written. Philos describes the Nazca lines, which weren't discovered until 1920. He talks about these massive mining operations that were in the Great Lakes. We touched on that at the beginning of the show. He also states that in his time, the sun was known as Incal. Okay, now the Inca, they call themselves the people of the sun. That's what that word Inca means, right? So if the Atlanteans called the sun Incal and the Inca called themselves the people of the sun, I mean, there's an obvious connection going on there, right? And again, Incas and their whole.
Shawnee, there's people saying it's a Palm 83 war. Either way, I can't see Israel finding peace now. The whole Muslim world's agitated. They're protesting all over the planet. It's not just Israel that's going to get hassled. We're going to get hassled too by them.
Culture, not something that was commonly available for people in libraries in the 1880s.
Yeah, I'm with you,
There's
Shawnee.
also mention of a ruined temple on the summit of the Grand Tetons, which is French for tites. And yeah, again, this is shown to be true. There's ruins of unknown origin at the summit
Hey,
of the
Vaz,
Grand
good to see you,
Tetons.
bro.
So all of those things were predicted, and then he also predicts or describes technology in this Atlantean time that wasn't available for people in the 1880s, things like the smartphone, holographic image projection, video surveillance, Ethernet, wireless energy, monorail, high-speed transportation, speech to text. Here's where it gets crazy, okay? Weather manipulation technology, which Jim Lee just dropped the hammer on all that nonsense and how the government's doing that. But he also describes things that reminded me of MK Ultra, where they would take these criminal Atlanteans and put them through this sort of like brain re-entertainment. That's exactly how they describe it, brain re-entertainment. And then, of course, electric rifles, or how they kept, you know, military order, they shot these lightning beams out of rifles and all sorts of other things.
Sounds
So,
like a ray gun, doesn't
What's up
it?
with the book machine?
the book machine. So I mean, essentially like a Kindle, right? A book machine got
Okay.
like
Okay.
a Kindle, and he described this again in the 1880s when
Yeah, and it's fascinating because you might think, oh, these are weird things to point out, but these are all the things he saw that had a corollary in the time he existed. I'm sure he saw many other things that were just inexplicable to him, but at least these things,
Right.
that's fascinating.
Which one,
That
boss?
is incredible. Wireless energy. Damn.
all of this stuff is described. And you know what's really wild about, and I didn't include a lot about this because it's way too complicated for me to even describe, but in this book, Philos talks about advanced physics, how the sun is actually this electromagnetic device, like more than just a hot ball of fire. Like he's talking about some really advanced stuff. And again, the author is only 19, 18 years old and from a place where he probably didn't have a great deal of access to information like this. So you just have to wonder, like, what's really going on with these channelings? And, it gets crazier when you start to compare. Because as you'll see, Casey and this guy, Oliver, who channeled Philos, they both talk about a similar sort of world back there in Atlantis times. But here's what I wanted to include because it kind of describes the way the elites were treating the people back then in Atlantis. So this is what Philos says towards the end of the book. And it's kind of interesting because I don't want to ruin it too much, but there's way more than just what I'm about to say. Eventually, not Zyme, who's a character we follow on this Atlantean adventure, he gets led into a desert, and then a sorcerer basically shows him how he killed both of his love interests, and then he's like, and now you're gonna die. And then the guy just dies. And then his soul is basically like stuck there, and he's wandering around as a ghost. And he's like, what do I do? What do I do? And, probably hundreds and hundreds of years later becomes Philos, right? So yeah, it's very, very strange what they're describing in this world. So he says, looking along the lines of life's yesterday, the reason became apparent why all the wondrous attainments of Atlantis had ceased and left no sign. Why Atla, which metaphorically held aloft the world in the light of science, had sunk beneath the
Wow,
waters
this is
and gone
interesting.
down into the deep, mysterious caverns to be hidden in an ignorance greater than that which shadowed Pompeii and Herculaneum from subsequent centuries. Natural decadence tells the story. As the centuries succeeding the time of the great Rai Guanlin lapsed 10, 15, 20, and more, the nation came to a greater glory of mechanics, of science, and of physical condition than even Guanlin's time. One by one, the scholars found that those things which had always been possible only through mechanical contrivance were more easily accomplished by purely psychic means. They had learned it was possible to divest themselves of the flesh and an astral body go whither they would and appear instant as the electric current at any distance. They learned that they could perform material actions and thus had projected themselves. So they go on to basically say the Atlanteans reached a point in their advancement that they didn't need technology. They did everything psychically. And the author who wrote this book, Michael Laflamme, he basically says maybe that's why we have no evidence of any of this, because at some point in history, the Atlanteans stopped making all this stuff, and then they destroyed their own civilization. So anything that was left was just boom, gone, right? And they were psychic and floating around back then, according to this guy. So, yeah.
You think they were in their own metaverse?
It honestly feels like they were trying to reverse what was inevitable. Like we now in present times are thought of or described as being in the third dimensional density, right? And what a lot of mystics and spiritual people describe is like a densening over time. So we're at our maybe densest right now, and at some point we're going to hit that like point where we go in the opposite trajectory. Maybe that's already happened. Maybe that was the dark ages. Maybe that was when we were the densest, and now we're getting back to the more higher vibration. But I really think it's like a pendulum where it just kind of swings back and forth, and what we're seeing is just history going in these sort of cycles that it does, where it kind of swings back like the pendulum to, bad forces overtaking and then good forces overtaking, just kind of like balancing itself. But yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of depravity. I know we don't have that much more time because we're getting into the hour mark here, but there's tons of proofs of Atlantis. One of the first oceanographic expeditions to survey the ocean, they basically made the statement that there's no improbability in the story that the Egyptian priests told to Solon. So basically, in another word of saying Atlantis is not improbable based on what we found at the bottom of the ocean. They're talking about the mid-Atlantic ridge, which could be this piece of land
doesn't it?
Into the ocean. So Edgar Casey, can't leave him out. We've mentioned.
Yeah, the depravity's getting worse, isn't it? God's given them over to reprobate minds. It's that serious. The whole world's been given over to reprobate mind.
So much. Sam, you'll like this. Edgar Casey, he committed to reading the Bible once a year, every year of his life. He was a devout Christian and was completely surprised. Like a lot of people.
Okay, but he believed in reincarnation, so he got conned by the fallen angels. On the surface, he was a genuine Christian, and he'd go to sleep. And when he'd go to sleep, he'd come up with treatments for patients that healed them, cured blindness, information on Atlantis and things like that. He thought he was a Christian, but he condoned reincarnation. So I don't think he's actually in heaven.
People hear about Edgar Casey and they think like, oh, who's this like scamster? He himself was completely surprised to find out that he had this ability to give people readings. He actually only found out about it accidentally because he came down with laryngitis. Somebody recommended that he speak with a hypnotist. The hypnotist put him under and said, hey, I'm not really good at this. You should ask this other guy. The other guy says to him, hey, you're actually way better at this than me. I hypnotized you and you started telling me what I was doing wrong. So you should consider like doing this full time. And, that just got in Edgar's head. And he'd always had these like psychic qualities. People talked about how when he was a kid, he could like fall asleep on a book and remember everything in the book. All sorts of other
that's true
things. And he just wanted to help people. Like he never charged anybody for reading. There were very wealthy people that sometimes got readings and they would give donations, of course, but over 15,000 readings. He never charged money. And his main gig was medical diagnosis, right? People would come to him when they were ill and they didn't know why. And back in the 1920s and 30s, like this was a necessity. You needed to know what was possibly wrong, because a lot of times the doctors wouldn't know and they would just give you, maybe their best guess, and that might not always work. So having somebody who could give you a accurate diagnosis was a really important thing back then. And he had a 90% accuracy rate, which, many doctors came in and tried to verify this. Even this like super like uptight German guy from Harvard came and interrogated him and was like, you show me how you do this. And Edgar Casey's like, hey man, I just need to fall asleep and like calm down. And he proved this guy wrong, and the guy sent the guy packing. But
what killed him?
Well, it's interesting. He knew that he was going to die the day before he died. I don't know what killed him. I didn't really look at that because there's just so much about Edgar Casey that, for the purposes of what I wanted to talk about, more of the Atlantis stuff, I didn't really get into all the weirdness with Casey's life, but that's another topic that I think we should have somebody come on the show to discuss, because there's a couple people that have written books about him that do interviews, and we can
So real quick, what did he say about Atlantis?
He said a lot about Atlantis.
Said a bunch of things about
Atlantis. He said a lot.
The most famous thing is that the Bimini roads, right? He basically predicted that they would find these structures off the coast of this island, and they did. And he even predicted the date that they would find it.
What?
Oh. So that was one of the more, Atlantean-centric predictions, but he talked, like I said, to people about what was wrong with them. So that was his main concern. And a lot of this Atlantis stuff was like kind of secondary. Like you'd go to him for a past life reading because there was something wrong in your life, and he'd say, well, hey, you're in your past life, you did this thing, and you're still making up for it in this current life.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, by the way, my second green tells me you're lactose intolerant. By the way, Atlantis was real. Anyways, free of charge. Have a great day.
well, one of the things that he said that's really astounding is that humans appeared on the Earth 200,000 years ago. Okay. And now geneticists have proven in the genetic record that that's about when what we consider like the oldest human ancestor, that's when it appeared. And that lines up with a lot of these dates that are in this book, Visions of Atlantis. The Caroline Bays, which we just talked about, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, he predicted that they were that Atlantis was destroyed in 10,000 BC. That was like the final destruction, essentially, because there were three
there's three
that Atlantis
cataclysms.
faced. And again, these scientists proved that when they looked into the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. He predicted the stock market crash of 1929 in February 1925. And he also predicted the Essenes, which you guys know about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They weren't found until 2 years after he died, yet he knew about things that were only learned about through the Dead Sea Scrolls. And there's tons more.
What
The
did he say? What
Atlantis.
did he learn?
Well, the Essenes basically were this sect of Christianity that had different ideas that now we consider Gnostic, right? So at the time, before the
See, that's not right. The Essenes aren't Gnostic at all. He's not right there. In fact, he's been wrong on a few biblical matters.
texts were found, there were Gnostic ideas around. They
No,
were
there wasn't.
present in certain religious texts, but until we found the Nag Hammadi text, there wasn't
Guys, we've been watching the Essenes. It isn't a Gnostic federation at all. He's wrong. And so is Edgar Casey.
like a main source for this information. Yet, based on what Edgar Casey's talking about, you could say, well, hey, he knew about this stuff before we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's weird. What about them? I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I didn't really prepare much on Gnosticism because I knew that was kind of a left field topic. But anyways, yeah, the Atlantis. I'm about to talk about something you really like, Sam. The next slide.
I love it all. I'm loving all this, buddy.
The next slide. But on the Atlantis point, to answer your question, he also predicted or revealed that at one time the Nile River flowed southwest down into the Atlantic, which it doesn't now. But satellite imagery now shows that it once did. So these are all things that couldn't have been known about in Edgar Casey's time, yet he revealed them in these, diagnoses that he gave and these readings that he gave. But he was once asked about Christ and to explain the historical backdrop of Jesus's incarnation in Palestine, because there's a lot of controversy even to this day about Jesus, right? So somebody was like, hey, Casey, tell us about what you know about Jesus. And he says, yes, we have the entity, referring to Jesus. The purpose for this, the desire to know the material history of the life of the master in the material world. Much might be given as to how or why and when there were the purposes that brought about the materialization of Jesus in this flesh. In giving then the history, there were those in the faith of the fathers to whom the promises were given that these would be fulfilled as from the beginning of man's record. Hence there was the continued preparation and dedication of those who might be the channel through which this chosen vessel might enter through choice into materiality. Thus in Carmel, where there were the priests of this faith, there were the maidens chosen that were dedicated to this purpose. Oop. Oh no, the Atlantean sex perverts.
What?
The Atlantean sex perverts got me. I was reading it.
That's the Ball Street? Oh, shit.
I clicked the wrong slide.
That's
here-
okay. Here we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully it doesn't move. Oh, okay. There were the priests of this faith. Okay. Among them was Mary, the beloved, the chosen one, and she, as had been foretold, was chosen as the channel. So he's essentially saying
So I told you he thought he was Christian, but he wasn't Christian when he comes up with crap like this. But he really did think he was Christian.
that Jesus was sort of channeled into Mary and, basically saying that there was a virgin birth. Okay.
Are you
So
calling him a homunculus?
Yeah.
Like Juan?
I have no comment on that. That's Juan's bag.
Easy, buddy. Easy. Easy.
That's Juan's bag. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting because a lot of people, again, they take all this stuff and they're like, oh, well, I don't know how this fits into my Christian worldview. When in fact, Casey was a Christian, he believed in the Bible, and even said to people,
He didn't believe in all of the Bible.
like, hey, when they asked him, how do you do all this stuff? He said, well, if you want to have spiritual powers, you should try reading the Bible and become more spiritual, right? And he gave a lot of what's it called? The onus wasn't on him; it was on God, right? He wasn't like claiming that, oh yeah, I'm the source of all this information. He realized he was just tapping into this greater source of information. Now people call it the Akashic record. I don't know if that was the term they used back then. But Casey, again, talked a lot about these Atlantean past lives. And what's interesting is, I didn't know this until yesterday, but Casey's first reincarnation reading is exactly 100 years ago from today. So look at that. It's kind of a weird little synchronicity. I was doing the research yesterday, and I'm like, whoa, 10/11/1923. That's exactly, 100 years ago. So
Whoa.
yeah, very weird that, and I didn't know this. I didn't plan this episode to be today because of this. It was just kind of a weird little synchronicity that popped up. And then in November 20th, 1923, he mentions Atlantis for the first time. And Sam, let me ask you this. Have you heard of the sons of Belial? Have you read about them at all in the Bible yet? Have you gotten to that part of the Bible?
No, I'm still in the part where Lot bangs his daughter and has kids. I'm at that part. I'm like, okay, what's going on here?
So I think eventually you get to a part where they talk about Belial. And I know you know about Baal. And it's funny because when Casey started channeling this stuff, he corrected the stenographer, the lady that wrote all this stuff down for him. He said, make sure you spell it Balial, like Baal L, like instead of Belial, Belial, right? So, and a lot of people talk about this entity Baal and having some sort of connection to sacrifice, right? And that's exactly what was going on in Atlantis, these sacrifices. So
These scumbags.
it says in one of Casey's readings, the competing Atlantean factions to varying degrees respectively sought discord and peace, with the sons of Belial particularly looking for discord, in the latter stages of the civilization, perpetually engaged in a struggle for the hearts and minds of their fellow men and women, often seeking to dominate both the citizenry and enslave the simple, still evolving things that populated Atlantis then. Notice how he refers to this as things, not people, not citizens, not humans, but things, okay? Who were bred and tampered with like livestock and used to perform menial tasks and manual labor, a theme they would continue later in Egypt. And this is something that they talk about when Atlantis fell. All of these hybrid beings went to Egypt. And what do you see when you look at Egyptian
Yeah, that's
hieroglyphs?
true.
You see crazy humans with bird heads and dog heads and every sort of head, and even, bodies, centaurs and sphinxes. And so clearly there's a culture that talks about this, and even the Chaldeans, aka the Babylonians, they talk about this as well, as these human hybrids and all these weird creatures. So Casey then says the early thought forms, as they incarnated in Earth density, were able to co-opt the naturally evolving creatures which inhabited the Earth before their descent into the material world, lending, he said from his many trance readings, support to the persistent myths of half man, half beast, the ogre, the satyr, the bird people, yada yada, right? So, and we've heard about these beings on the show before, even like the dog man that Tony talks about being in Kentucky. Go figure that Egypt, right? The word Kentuck in Egypt meant land of the dog. So, what are the odds that people see dogmen in Kentucky and it has that connotation? So, anyways, some more weird statements from Atlantis. As has been indicated in that particular experience, there were still those who were physically entangled in the animal kingdom, with appendages, with cloven hooves, with 4 legs, with portions of trees, with tails, with scales, with those various things that thought forms or evil had so indulged in as to separate the purpose of God's creation of man. And this is what the Bible talks about. The people had, fallen astray from God's plan, and he had to make things right? So, and I think this is genetic modification is what we're talking about here. And they even talk about these like plastic surgeries and these operative surgeries that these hybrids would go through to make themselves look more human. And eventually the Atlanteans were able to essentially breed out all of those hybrid qualities so that they were more human-like. And, some people today demonstrate qualities that are like, these people that are born with full faces of hair, right? These, wolf boys. And there are people who are born with tails. There's the tree man who lives in somewhere in Asia who has like bark growing out of his.
Yep.
These things are not totally far-fetched. There's, modern evidence of these sorts of things happening.
Well, I'm Armenian. We could be the werewolf people.
Well, and Armenia has a very weird ancient past too. I mean, Armenia is right there in the action. So yeah, I gotta find somebody to talk about the megaliths in Armenia. I think you would.
I'm down.
So, but we'll probably end on this. I don't know how much time we have left, so maybe we'll just read this sex perverts Atlantean past life reading, and let me know what you guys think. So. Edgar Sayce himself once alluded, and again, this comes from Visions of Atlantis by Michael Leflemme, great book, just bought it last week. Edgar Sayce himself once alluded to this trend of Atlantean sexual deviance and tampering with the human form in an uncomfortable session given to a U.S. Army infantryman from Greenville, Michigan. Casey begins from trance. Here we have an unusual entity, for the entity is an Atlantean and will, in this experience, either make a marvelous success or a miserable failure with its life. Then he details his suggestions for the young man in this life before continuing. There's little, if anything, which has to do with human behavior about which the entity does not know a great deal. The relationship with sex has a special, definite urge on the body, and this may become the stumbling block. But rather is it that the apparent egotism, the sarcasm, the know-it-all expression of the entity may be the greater curse to this entity. He then explains how in his past life, before that we find the entity was in the Spanish land, when there were those early periods of adventure and the settling in other lands, those lands from which the fruits of the earth of nature might be gathered. He was a man named Herman Hernandez, who had many vices, one of those being the opposite sex. And he explored those often, it says here something about slave girls in his next life in Persia. So this guy, he's got some problems. In his past life, he was doing some messed up stuff, a little conquistador rape, some concubine rape, not good stuff. I don't recommend it. But, what are you going to do? It's your past life. You don't really get to choose.
Thank you for taking a stance on that, Mark.
Well, these past life crimes, we don't want any past life Me Too's.
Yeah. Right? Oh, imagine him Me Too'd in your past life.
Exactly. All right. So let me backtrack to my.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up, Mark, because unfortunately, Daddy has to go get his daughters. I'm sorry, everybody. Just
Okay.
flying out in a few. I have to jam. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Let me just finish this one last thing. Okay, so before that, we find the entity was in the Atlantean land, where those periods of the law of the children of the one, of the sons of Belial, the entity with the abilities to bring those things to pass from the application of the spiritual laws in its use for gratifying of material appetites, brought under its control many of those brought into the material experiences in the opposite sex, or was able to make them one form or another, shapely, unshapely, those with forms divine, those with such monstrosities. So they're basically describing that in Atlantis, they were doing like some sort of magical plastic surgery to create the ideal sex partner out of all these different hybrid options. So, yeah, there's the juicy details at the end of the at the end of the Atlantis.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
There's tons more, and if you're interested, I'm going to be doing a full breakdown on my podcast, and we'll hopefully get Michael LaFlemme on the show to talk more about this. And people can check out his book, Visions of Atlantis, to read it all, or A Dweller on Two Planets is the other book that I talked about, and then all of Edgar Casey's stuff is available through the foundation, the Edgar Casey Foundation. But yeah, very, very weird stuff. They were, apparently hanging dinosaurs, hybrids, and then their huge crystal death ray accidentally blew up everything and killed all the dinosaurs. So that's their explanation for how the dinosaurs died. They were like, okay, we need to cause some kind of cataclysm to get rid of them. And they accidentally turned the thing up too high, and it basically destroyed way more than they had planned for. So, yeah, that's Atlantis, according to...
What a weird episode, bro. That's a weird episode. It was fun. The ramifications are interesting. The Atlantis like to just make shit and then stick dicks in it. Very weird. Very weird.
And again,
fun
don't take it from me. There are countless people who've channeled this information. It's out there if you go looking for it, and I'll make sure that you guys have the links to put in the description.
Please do. I want to. I mean, basically this was weird science. Atlantis was weird science, right? Just a bunch of dorks making big titty things to drop D's on.
Exactly. Well, and I have an idea, because this is tinfoil hat, and I know you guys are busy, so I'm not asking you guys to do anything, but just
thank you
with me for a second. Broken Sim, you have an awesome voicemail system, and I was thinking I'm going to set up a voicemail just for tinfoil hat that people can call in and leave their weird experiences. Maybe they've been abducted. Maybe they had.
You might be teasing something here, Mark, that is in the works. I will tell you that.
Well, then it's
you
not.
might be teasing something that
we weren't prepared to announce for another 2 weeks. But yeah,
wasn't my idea.
Things are coming, buddy. Things are coming. Don't you worry about it.
Parallel thinking. I had no idea. Okay, never mind. I'll shut up now.
Things are coming, brother. Things are coming. Things are coming. All right, guys. Well, thank you, Mark. One more time. Tell them where they can find you.
MyFamilyThinksI'mCrazy.com is the best place to go. You can listen to the show on YouTube, Rockfin, all the apps. And thank you so much, Sam. I love being here.
Well, it was great, Mark. We loved it.
Johnny.
Oh, yeah, guys, I've got another one of theirs. They're pretty entertaining. Where is it? Now let me find it, guys. Nah, that'll take me heaps for me. Hang on. I'll find it here. Hang on, guys. I'm just trying to find it. Okay, got it. Bloody remote.
I was gonna say, since we got Sam and Jay on here, I'm interested.
Oh, come on. Bloody remote battery's going flat.
Oh, what the fuck are you guys even talking about?
Global controls will have to be imposed. And a world governing body will be created to enforce them.
Welcome to Tinfoil Hat. We go deep, homeboys. Aaron, open your mind. Straight from the fountain of knowledge. There's lizard people everywhere. That's some interdimensional dynamic. Wake up, Aaron.
This is only the beginning.
Dude, you just blew my mind.
Are you ready to get your mind blown?
Shawnee, that's why they went into Afghanistan to get the poppy fields and the lithium mines. Apparently, there's lithium mines in Afghanistan as well.
Good morning, Swarm, and welcome to Tinfoil Hat. You know I am. You know I'm here too. Joining me as always, Xavier Guerrero, and on the ones and twos, Jay Nice, Juicy Johnny Woodard. Crazy show today. We had a guest who had to cancel, so we called in Big Guns. You know, some might call them the B unit. I call them the ready to fucking go to war guys. And we're very excited to have them on. We're going to bring them in. Isaac Weissop and Jay Dyer. We'll have them in 2 seconds. But before, I want to tell you about some dates I got coming up. And I need you guys. Listen, here's what I want to say, and I'm not going to talk long about this. I know you guys are like what happens with my fans, and I'm very appreciative that you guys come and see me. You guys take your time to buy tickets. If you plan on seeing us, Eddie Bravo, myself, Xavier Guerrero.
Diane, I think USA is going to plunge into war before Mike Johnson can even get that impeachment charge against Biden, because they want to impeach him for treason. He's going to go down and blow the world up doing it. You watch and see.
In Indianapolis, in St. Louis, please buy a ticket. Please. You make these people stress out, and then when you all show up, they're like, oh, it's great. I'm like, okay, just buy a ticket, please. Well, you know it's going to be Crush, myself, Xavier, and XG doing stand-up. Then the second show is Swarm Tank, okay? Then I'm in Bellflower on the 10th for their second anniversary show. Everyone says the stand-up club is an amazing comedy club.
Yeah.
Plus to be there. And then Austin on the 17th and Dallas on the 19th. So go grab your tickets to those before they sell out. And so let's get into it. Very excited to have these gentlemen on again. Somebody canceled at the last second, so I called in, the best of the best. I'm very excited to have them on. You can see them both on Rockfin, and they both have amazing books out. So please welcome to the show, Isaac Weissop and Jay Dyer. How are you guys?
Oh, Jay Dyer. Okay.
Cool.
I'm happy to be the third round draft pick, Kurt Rambis going in.
I know a Jay Dyer. Oh, yes, I know who he is. Yeah.
Dog, Kurt Rambis is still working in the NBA. Still working in the NBA. Yeah, you're doing well. You're doing well. We're all blind in the truther community. Apparently, we all need glasses. Isaac, how are you?
Hey, what's going on? I'm glad you guys called us both in for this. This is a good one.
I'm very excited. Real quick before we get into it, in case someone just tuned in for the first time, Isaac, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where our guests can find you?
Of course. So I do a podcast called Occult Symbolism and Pop Culture, and this is my 13th appearance on here. I don't mean to brag, but I keep a running tally because I want to have that crown on my head for the Tinfoil Hat champ. I don't know if anyone's close to 13. But,
I don't think anybody is. Eddie Bravo, maybe.
Oh, okay. That's good company.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I was just watching your Instagram live, and
I didn't know Iraq had poppy fields. I didn't know that.
Conspiracy guy.
Yeah.
And,
I will drink
dreams
coffee
happen here
even if it gives you AIDS. I will continue.
I like that commitment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you haven't done other things.
Yeah, I mean that's true too. But the point is, At this point, I got a clean bill of health. If they're like, dude, it's just coffee now causes AIDS. Still drinking coffee, full blown AIDS. That's what we're doing. And Jay, where can our tell us a little bit about yourself, where our guests can find you?
I do a lot of podcasts and streams, live streams that cover everything from movies to geopolitics to books to just riffing on crazy shit in the news. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Jay Dyer. And you can find me every Friday doing the 4th hour of the Alex Jones Show over on his platforms. And you can find me on Rockfin as well.
Well, congratulations on that. I think that's a great base for you to tap into. And I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited to have both you guys in these crazy times and what's going on. You know, it's very interesting to me as a conspiracy theorist. I don't know if you guys consider yourself conspiracy theorists. I don't know, you might be researchers. But it just seems like everything we talk about seems to be coming true. We could always go on like, okay, Q, PSYOP, we get that. We'll throw that to the side. But outside of that, just seems like everything right now that we were always talking about seems to have come true. Like Russiagate, we said Russia had nothing to do with this. Hillary was behind it. That turned out to be true. January 6th was a giant CIA Fed operation. That seemed to be true. The George Floyd stuff seems to be true now that everyone's talking about that. What are your whole thoughts on that? And why are we still demonized? Isn't that the crazy part? You still get called, crazy conspiracy theories. Like, how much right do we have to get right before you realize we're right?
I think I might be able to start out here because I probably have the most sort of divergent opinion in the conspiracy world on all this stuff, because I'm what I call the OG granola wokester, right? Like, I've got a very I heard you, Sam, talk about this. I have more of a 90s liberal vibe, and whatever happened to the term liberal kind of went off the rails, and I can no longer identify as that. I'm probably closer to libertarian now if you had to label me. But I think that from my personal worldview, and I don't study geopolitics like Jay does. Jay's much more on the pulse of the geopolitical angle and stuff like that. I do more of occult symbolism and let's talk about Satanism in this movie or whatever, right? I keep it a little more lighthearted because, and because I feel like when you
is hilarious that you just said, like, I talk about Satanism in the movie. I keep it lighthearted.
It is. I think so. Because I was really into politics in the early 2000s. I paid a ton of attention. I consumed so much media in the 2000s, and Michael Moore was kind of a red pill daddy for me because I watched Fahrenheit 9/11, and I said, oh my God, like, this is crazy. Look at these neocons. What are they doing? And you do enough research into the world of conspiracy, you start to come around to some of the ideas like David Icke taught me about the Hegelian dialect and how, two wings in the same bird idea that the left and right are both sort of in bed together. And I maintain that position. But as far as like I think what happened to sort of, I could ramble on for an hour about this, but I think that with the Q thing that happened, it started to funnel the conspiracy theorist truther world into a political sort of agenda, right or wrong. And I never really got behind that. Trump's a funny guy. I think he's an entertaining president. But I don't really want him. I don't like his personal opinions and things that he does. But I also don't like Biden either, which is hilarious that we're going to be facing these two boneheads in the next damn election. I'm like, how is it possible with 350 million people? We're stuck with these two, damn 80-year-old dudes who are completely out of touch with what's going on with the youth. But I do think that there was an agenda to capture the conspiracy theorist voice, and right or wrong as to what conspiracy theorists think about all these players. But I think they wanted to capture the voice and at least give the appearance that it's radicalized and it's now fringy. And I know this because I had to change. I didn't have to. I chose to change the title of my podcast from Conspiracy Theories in Unpopular Culture to Occult Symbolism in Pop Culture, because it became so divisive and so black pill in the 2020, 2021. And you guys were there too. Facing apocalyptic style book burning censorship, and the to me it was very clear that was that axe was coming for me next, so I had to sort of pivot, sort of change some things, and I think that was the ultimate goal, basically, is to sort of make it so divisive and so red hot and so nasty that people who don't want to get into these arguments, they just avoid the whole topic.
No, I'm with you on that. I mean, like we kind of find out that it's like it's so weird how the pendulum just swung. Like if you sat there and you go, "Hey, people from 2001," there would be a time in the year 2020 where Fox News is seen like the voice of reason, and they'd be like, "What are you talking about? That's impossible." These people lied us into weapons of mass destruction, along with CNN as well, But
I think they take their turns, right? I think the left and the right take their turns as to how far down this agenda, which Jay could speak more on, of like the ultimate higher agendas. He's been studying the crap out of this stuff, and I dislike the Fox News thing completely. And funny enough, today I was watching Hannity and Dana White talking, and I was listening to Hannity. I was like, dude, I like what Hannity's saying here, right? He was talking about all kinds of stuff, and it's just a weird world we live in, and I think to just put a label on yourself and commit to that gang warfare two-party system
with you, man.
is divisive.
I think it's just you do a disservice to humanity, to your country, to whatever when you decide it's your ride or die with one party. I just think it's a stupid way to go, and I think it's dangerous. And and I'd love to hear Jay's opinion on this, but like I've been on the last podcast, we were talking about the truther communities, like that game in Squid Games where like if you moved you got shot. It's like like everyone starts off in one way, let's say with the 9/11, like everyone's behind, the government's behind 9/11, we all move forward, and then Hillary comes through, and or now we got like the anthrax scare, and everyone's like, that doesn't really make sense. Oh no, they're attacking us. Boom, you get shot. So now you fall side, and then we just keep moving forward. Oh, Hillary won the election. Okay, you got Russians came in, you got shot, and it's like now we're into this. The only people left seem to be the ones who are going like, none of this makes sense. What's happening in the Middle East right now, and how we're so anti-war all the time on all this stuff, and now you're just so pro-war. And I understand that there's some biblical applications here, but I just want to believe in my heart of hearts that God's plan isn't to false flag us into a World War III. Like the God of all gods, the one, his prophecy isn't to false flag us into a World War III. That's my humble opinion. And like how everybody is just throwing out all this data. Like if we study this long enough, we know their playbooks. And we see their playbooks happening in real time, then we gotta go, this doesn't make sense. But all these truthers and all these anti-war people and all these anti-authority people, they're falling for it again. When they were so anti with it when it came to, the Ukraine or Syria and all this stuff, like they were all against it. Now suddenly they're totally for it. What are your thoughts on that, Jay?
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly they can flip left and right, to be basically the opposite types of positions. Like you could go back to Dave McGowan's books, and he theorized, I think he's correct, that the establishment basically took over the anti-war movement in Vietnam and turned it into a lot of just, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, rather than, anti-establishment, anti-Vietnam War stuff, because people were starting to see through the war at that time. So they became very adept at, Tavistock and places like this in terms of studying how to steer these different movements and groups that have, anti-establishment sentiment. And I think that if you fast forward to the 2000s, post Big 9 event, I remember getting awake to 9/11 in 2003. And I remember at that time, if you questioned 9/11, everybody just default assumed that you were part of the Democratic Party, which I was never interested in Democratic Party politics, but I was awake to 9/11 in 2003. And I remember having arguments at, Thanksgiving with family members and boomer neocon family people trying to argue with me. That probably wasn't the best time to bring up, 9/11 was an inside job at Thanksgiving and Christmas meals. But But I mean,
You were the,
you know, I was,
crazy uncle.
yeah, exactly right. And then within no time, I think Obama was a big death knell to the truth movement, because once Obama came in, all the left thought that they had won a big victory. But then Obama basically immediately did everything that neoconservatives wanted, right? He was pretty much the JP Morgan big banker candidate. So he really duped a lot of people. And I agree with the analysis that basically the classic 9/11 truth movement was basically done with after Obama. He pretty much killed it. And so then we got, you know, more of this nonsense with more neoconservatism. And basically, I think neoconservatism just took over all of Washington. So whether you're rhino or whether you're a leftist, you're all just subservient to a larger corporate agenda. And that's what both parties really represent. And I think what happens with a lot of figures like Trump or an RFK Jr. is that they might even have some degree of sincerity on the campaign trail, but they soon have to kind of capitulate. So we'll hear a lot of rhetoric. And I'm not trying to knock either RFK Jr. or Trump. I think at this point, RFK Jr. is saying more truth than Trump. But I think that what will happen is that as he more and more kind of tries to make his way into the election, I think what's going to happen is that you'll notice him kind of, and this is the way politics is, right? Politics is always just compromise. You have to compromise more and more and more. And then it basically just becomes the overall agenda. So the technocratic agenda marches on no matter who's in there. Last point I'll say is that I think that the whole left-right paradigm functions on a faulty assumption of, rather than it being about true and false, right? It's a question of what's true, what's false, what's right, what's wrong. The whole left-right paradigm just functions on a fake balance of power, an Overton window, which allows the overall agenda.
Shawnee, just in time for the Great Tribulation. I got saved in 2015, 16-ish. Go 7 years forward, the time of sorrows, and now we're about to head into tribulation. So just in time, I was woke up.
To keep marching forward. And that's why conspiracy theorists are always pretty much right when it comes to, I mean, I not, maybe not always right, but like I said, day one, I did videos about Q being fake. That was all a psyop. I mean, you know, I talked about a lot of these things being cognitive infiltration in terms of fake right-wing movements and baiting people into traps. And I think that's exactly what happened in the last several years with a lot of right-wing stuff. So yeah, I agree pretty much with what Isaac said. I think that it's a question of true versus false versus right versus left, but everybody thinks of it as right versus left and not true versus false.
I agree with that. And it's what I was talking with Brian Callen about the other day, is that, you know, it's like, you know, and I love him. I love Brian Callen. People don't realize how great Brian Callen is, but in that heat of the discussion, I was saying that, you know, he sees the world like Transformers. You're either GoBots or did we lose Jay?
No, he took a step back.
Okay. You're either GoBots or you're Decepticons, and there's no way that the GoBots would ever do Decepticon shit. And I'm like, that's exactly how the game is played. They want you to think they're a GoBot, but they're pulling some Decepticon shit. It's like Grays. It's like, I don't know why people think it's offensive to question every single narrative. Like, how many times do you have to get lied to by any one entity before you're like, I'm just going to question this right now. I know your game plan. I know what you're doing. This seems to fall into the playbook that you've done so many times. And people just can't come to grips with that. And what makes me really sad is I have so many people that I love so much that I'm watching on the internet right now, just completely acting like chaos is about to break out. And Johnny was talking before the show that maybe he's going to sit this one out, and I respect that. At the same time, I go, is that dangerous?
Well, let's talk about why I said that. It's because of the people I end up having to be allied with on this one, like all the most annoying people on college campuses that we've been, you know, at war with for years now, that would happily throw any of us in the street for literally most of the things we've said already just on this one podcast.
Well, it's almost like,
and then it's like the guy from the Young Turks, that
Good
asshole.
night, Jay. Good to see you, mate.
There's so many annoying people that are
it's
right.
almost like if you go left enough, you'll eventually be right, right? It's like you're going to go left so much, you find yourself on the right now. And it's just like the same thing the other way. that I just think it's eventually, and maybe this is all part of it as well, to divide and conquer, to get everybody niched down to this like this, so it's like you and one other person alone in your chat room agreeing with each other.
Oh, the siloing thing is real for sure.
You know, I don't know how mind blowing any of these ideas are going to be to the audience, because obviously this audience has been red pilled fully. But David McGowan wrote this book called Understanding the F Word, American Fascism and the Politics of Illusion. And he wrote this in 2001. And it's really interesting. I'm not all the way through it because I plan on doing because that's my kind of concern. This little voice in the back of my head is worried about fascism and a dictatorship, which I think could flow into the theocracy idea of a dictatorship led by supposed science, right? And trusting the science entirely. And he said in here, I'm going to read you 2 sentences. He says a bunch of stuff, but then he says, wealth has been concentrated during Clinton's tenure on a scale never before seen in history, as the gap between rich and poor widens with each passing week. And that encapsulates a lot of stuff that you'll notice, because I have very progressive sort of liberal social beliefs, and even when the liberals get into office, they never do anything. Like Obama gets in and they champion the Obamacare, which it has good elements, right? Like they don't ban you for pre-existing conditions. You can go self-employed and find health.
Yeah, but Shawnee, God doesn't abandon Israel, so it doesn't matter if man abandons Israel. God will back him.
Insurance. I don't know how much different that is now, because I have an insurance agent I talked to about getting self-employed insurance, and you can do that without the marketplace. But and then Biden, right? When Biden was running, they were talking about legalizing marijuana, or what do you call it? Decriminalizing it, or yeah. I sure as hell haven't seen that happen. And he was trying to pay off some school debt, which look, I've got school debt. I'll take the payoff, but I actually don't agree with that aspect. Like that's where the liberal of me sort of.
Well, now we know why you're a shit lib. You just want that school debt paid off.
I want that school debt paid off. I want that free weed. I want that free weed. I want that Obama phone. No, but you'll notice like none of these changes happen. And they use each other. The liberals use the conservatives and say, well, it's because the conservatives are blocking it. And then, they say this crap to get in office, and then nothing ever really changes except for the class warfare. And that's another reason why I don't like Trump, is because he was in there when they passed the tax reforms that I think there was an even bigger concentration of wealth in the last few years, and we're all experiencing it during 2020. And with that tax cut that all the middle class and lower class tax cuts expired, all the rich folks tax cuts is still in place.
And in COOF, which centralized all that money for the billionaire elite and cut out a bunch of mom and pop stores, which Trump bears a big responsibility for his participation in all the COOF nonsense.
Yeah, it's super interesting, because like he definitely 100% gives people hope, while at the same time he's participated in things that have just annihilated people, and they just and it's almost like, okay, we're never going to get the perfect candidate, but you're willing to accept things that were just so incredibly bad, like like DeSantis, Nikki Haley, is that her name? Nikki Haley. Like they're all like bragging about violating the First Amendment for another country, which I don't even think Israel, honestly, is another country. I think it's the 51st state. I think it is the 51st state. That's why it's called the State of Israel. And it is just, and the Bank of England has made it part of the United States, and that's why it's called the State of Israel. It's not called the country of Israel. It's called the State of Israel. Guys, guess what time it is? NBA season! That's right, guys.
I don't know what that is.
It was just the most wonderful time of the year. That's right, dude.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if the world abandons Israel. God's still with them, Phil. 100%.
NBA season is upon us. So let me tell you something, guys. NBA fans, the wait is over. Basketball's back. And
confused as a conspiracy theorist. On the one hand, I look at the big agenda and things going on, and I say, well, when you boil it all down, it comes down to concentration of wealth. It's a class warfare is what everything is about. But then on the other hand, if I put on my sort of occult religious, sort of occult beliefs hat, I think, no, this is more about instilling a Luciferian antichrist world government. Or maybe it's a blend of both. And the thing going on in Israel right now is quite possibly the beginning of the final push towards this, Luciferian global
I
world
feel
order.
that too, dude. Jay, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, one book, actually a couple books I've been reading recently that actually tie what you just said there together is, I went back and read the classic conspiracy book, Committee 300. Have you read that, Isaac?
No.
You should check it out, Dr. John Coleman's book, because he wrote that in 1992, and basically everything that's rolling out now, he predicted in that 1992 book. And then another book he wrote, which ties together the Luciferian agenda and the class warfare, is his other book called One World Order, which Socialist Dictatorship, which is now in print. It's been out of print for like 20 years and is back in print. So he basically goes into the history of the Fabian socialists who aligned themselves with monopoly capitalists to manage a lot of dialectics to bring about the final synthesis, which would be the technocratic global order. So the highest levels of Marxism, socialism, after Marx basically said, we're going to have to make an alliance with big capital because we can't get the revolution through by workers. The workers, I mean, they're worried about, cigarette breaks and eating sandwiches. They're not worried about, Marx's dialectical theories of property. They're not sitting around, thinking about that. So they basically said, we're going to have to align with, people like David Rockefeller, who learned under Harold Lasky at Harvard, who was a famous socialist, and John Maynard Keynes, and all these characters pushed through a bunch of what is now becoming kind of the proto Davos Klaus world order. That's all from these people. So those are two good books that tie together both the sort of Luciferian agenda and the class warfare agenda.
You know what I don't understand is, and sorry, I don't mean to hijack it, Sam.
Hijack.
All right. One thing that always, because I'm not as well versed in these particular sort of ideas, I'm always confused as to why, like, we'll say that communism is the boogeyman, Karl Marx is the boogeyman, all this stuff. And then in the next breath, we look back at the 50s, 60s, 70s, and we talk about all this disinformation from the ABCs, the intelligence agencies, that they sure as hell tried to make sure communism didn't get a foothold, to the point of assassinating Black Panthers and all this wild stuff. And I think, well, whose side should we be on? Because if you put on your conspiracy hat and say, okay, so they shut down all these communist ideas, well, is that because they don't want that system to come through? And I'm not advocating for communism here, folks. Don't.
No, but it's a really great question.
But that's the stuff that makes me think, and that's actually why I'm reading this book, because I'm starting to sort of try to understand how all these political systems work, because it's a lot to sort of digest.
Yeah, you're a great question. Like, why was there a giant push to stop communism when there seems to be a giant push to push Marxism right now, right? That's kind of is that what you were asking? Because
that's it. I think that fairly sums it up. I don't understand how the two things. I just don't understand how it all fits together.
Yeah, I'm with you on
Well,
that.
that's one of my fortes. I could be the know-it-all to answer all your questions.
Love that. That's why we
There
brought
you
you
go.
on. We need a know-it-all. Does anyone know it all?
I mean, in a way, isn't that why they killed JFK?
Partly, I think.
Where in a way where he was the one trying to stop it and participate.
Yeah, Israel becomes a burdensome stone. It does start to become that now.
Well, if you read Dark Mission with Richard Hoagland and Mike Barra, they talk about how JFK was proposing to do a joint cooperative mission with the Soviet Union to get man to the moon, and they didn't like that. The intelligence agencies didn't like that because, again, it sort of promoted communism. Now, I don't know if that holds true, because you had the whole Bay of Pigs thing before that, but that's what I had read, was it was him trying to sort of make peace with the Soviets, and that was a real problem, apparently.
So there was a good article that was written by somebody from the CIA not too long ago. I forget the name of the author, but basically doing a history of the organization's political affiliation. And they made a really good point in that article, saying basically that you might mistake the CIA in the Cold War for being a quote right-wing institution. In reality, the CIA was anti-Soviet, but it was not right-wing. And that helps, I think, make the distinction, because at the same time as they were anti-Soviet, they were pushing a lot of the leftist social agenda in the United States, like Miss Magazine and Feminism, Playboy Magazine, Hugh Hefner, all the abstract art was being pushed by the CIA through the Congress of Cultural Freedom. So they were trying to push a cultural agenda of liberalism against Sovietism. But the modus operandi, again, of many, many people in the CIA, the OSS and CIA, they came out of the CFR. So a lot of the CFR people kind of went directly also into being the heads of the OSS and the heads of the CIA. And most people in the CFR, maybe not everybody, but most of them have a Fabian socialist idea. So yeah, that's the key here, is that Fabian socialism isn't identical to Sovietism. And again, it's this approach where they favored a slow kill, a slow implementation model of socialism rather than the hard, heavy-handed socialist dictatorship. So you have to work slow to that. That's why the symbols that they use in the Fabian Society window is like it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Is one of their symbols. Yeah. Another symbol is the turtle, who has the slow approach versus trying to do really heavy-handed stuff like Hitler or Stalin, right? So that's and they're consciously, openly aligned with monopoly capital. And so that was the key thing that I've been researching last year, is just reading a lot of Fabian texts. They were able to influence Henry Ford, David Rockefeller, a lot of JP Morgan, a lot of the big magnates in the United States adopted this kind of a socialism. And that's why, have you heard of the Reese Committee hearings? You guys heard of that?
No.
If you look at the Reese Committee hearings, those were hearings, I think, in the 60s, where basically they were looking into why were the biggest foundations and think tanks in the U.S., like Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller, pushing all of this leftist and socialist stuff in university systems. And the answer is what we're talking about, is that they've always wanted that slow approach to taking down America and putting it into a socialist technocracy versus any of these older models of like libertarian free market. And I don't think that libertarian free market out of the Enlightenment is like perfect. I think that was an older form of revolution that, as H.G. Wells says, H.G. Wells says, we will let the monopoly capitalists build the global government in terms of the infrastructure and the corporations. And he says, we, the socialists, will take it over. So they don't have a problem with that modus operandi. And that actually is that's a big help in explaining the Cold War. That's why David Rockefeller can write New York Times editorial saying that Mao was the greatest modern leader in the modern world. He thinks Mao is the preeminent example of how a country should be governed, is Maoism. So here's one of the richest dudes in America saying that Maoism is amazing, it's great. Lord Victor Rothschild, another figure, he was playing both sides, British intelligence and the KGB throughout the Cold War. That's confirmed in like KGB Colonel diaries now, that they figured out he was playing both sides. And so there's a lot of figures like this in the Cold War that Anthony Sutton identifies in his Wall Street book, Wall Street, the Bolshevik Revolution, that basically they were funding the fascists, they were funding the socialist, Marxist, communists, and the end goal was this synthesis. So it's all premised on Hegelian philosophy that you're talking about, the Hegelian dialectic. They think that you got to smash Western capitalism versus Eastern communism, and out of that you will get the synthesis of what they call the third way, or the Fabian socialist model.
I find that very interesting, dude. I find that very interesting, the slow rollout, because I don't know if you guys saw Jimmy Carr was just on Rogan, and he said something that we've been saying on the show forever. And we're not the first one to say it, but it's that he believed that the Roman Empire didn't die. It just rebranded itself as the Catholic Church. And then he said he doesn't think that the British Empire was destroyed. He thinks it rebranded itself as the Bank of England, the City of London. And I would tell you that in my heart of hearts, I believe the Nazis didn't lose World War II. I think they actually won it, walked over here, and brand themselves as the CIA. And they hijacked our military. And in the process, what they've done to us is they've lulled us into this false sense of comfortably numb. They've given us enough, and even more than enough, so that we don't actually ever have to pay attention to anything. And that we don't actually pay attention to what is going on to the world, what these banks are using our military for, which are stormtroopers. Nobody actually pays attention to that. Nobody actually cares. War is a video game to the average American. Unless you served in the war, you don't really care because it never comes to our shores. I do believe, and when it does come, it comes in a way of like a 9/11 or a the Maui fire or all these things where it's like there's so much murky gray area that you don't actually go, were we just attacked? You don't care.
But isn't that a good thing in general? Like, do you say that once you turn 18, every man should join the military? Because that's the only way that we can expect war. Because if not, then I don't know. War is. I mean, Johnny's been more in the
What
woods,
do you
but
mean by that? That's the only way we
Yeah,
can expect
I think
war.
that sentence out.
No, so no, like Israel, how they sent their youth to war, and that way,
Well,
when war
that's why Ben Shapiro is threatening everybody with nuclear war if America doesn't, because Israel actually doesn't want to send their children to die for this war because all their kids have to join the military. They want to send Americans in to die for the war. That's what's really going on. That's why they need our assistance. But the point is, it's like they've lulled us into this idea. Like when you watch the internet, you watch Instagram, you watch TikTok, Americans don't seem to be concerned. It's like Elon Musk just said in his Twitter space, we are sleepwalking our way into World War III because we don't actually have to pay attention to it. And that has been done on purpose. And again, I know sometimes I repeat myself on the show, but like when we talked about last week, when I think we're in this, like we don't understand, but maybe in a different way, but the same way, we are kind of like North Korea in that they keep their population so isolated from what everybody else is doing. And in this way of like, oh, great leader, we have the best, we're the luckiest, we're the North Koreans. And in reality, they're not at all. But
sorry, Sam, go ahead, man. I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off.
but just to finish it off, is like the way we see the rest of the world, and you have people who travel and they come back and they're blown away how Japan is, how countries in Latin America are. You know, that, like, again, we talked about it last week, but Americans' view of Kazakhstan versus what Kazakhstan really is.
I mean, to agree with you, I didn't know Gaza had buildings like that.
Yeah, right?
I didn't know they were a city. I thought it was very fucking Middle Eastern, very Iraq, where there might have been a couple. No, that's a city.
We're slept in our we sleep in our understanding of the world, and that is done on purpose so that we have no real understanding of how we are the frog in the pot right now. And they've used our military and like all of these intelligence agencies are the same agency. They're just have different brands for each area, you know, like, so it seems like it's more of a home team when in reality it's all the same team. And it's the elites out of Switzerland, the Vatican, City of Rome, and Washington DC versus everybody. And they are the Western powers in which BRICS and China and Russia want to battle. And that's my opinion. Isaac, what'd you have to say if you remember?
Yeah. So Alan Watts there's a quote, I don't know it off the top of my head, but something to the effect of how reality is more of a Rorschach test. And you can take that down a whole rabbit hole about the ideas of the mind as a biocomputer, which is John C. Lilly's stuff. And it's really interesting because when we were talking about 9/11, you know, if you go back to the warning that of the military industrial complex, what was that, like 70 years ago, that was said, I think it was Eisenhower that said it. And then you go to 9/11 and George Bush told us to go shopping. You know, there was no sacrifice by the public. And but the truth is the sacrifice is made through the paycheck, through the taxes. And these other countries, that's the only thing that bugs me is some of the other countries have, you know, you were talking about Gaza has like nice buildings or whatever, and I don't know, Germany or somewhere has got socialized medicine.
Just so you know, Xavier Guerrero said that, so we don't know
Okay.
how close to reality that is. But that's how I speak English as a second language. Stoner fucking take, so that's his take. Like on Gaza being fancy, like that,
fancy, but
that might be a
I thought it
XG
was
classic
worse. I
right
thought it
there.
was worse than Mexico.
Yeah, yeah, but it is.
Huh?
It is.
The infrastructure, like you look at the buildings and like there's actually a city. Like when I first thought of Gaza, I thought it was just a middle thing.
But
it's
a concrete.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be a lot better. I mean, they used to have an international airport there that just completely got destroyed.
Yeah,
the
it is a
Airport.
concrete. And some people are gonna get angry, but it's a concrete open air prison. So you know, where would you rather live, Mexico or Gaza? Mexico all day, dog.
No, I understand that. What I'm trying to say, I never saw how big of a city it was. I thought it was very like Iraq.
Okay.
As in like 3 little buildings.
Yeah, okay. Like huts and people.
No, it's a
riding,
fucking city.
like,
It's
like weird planets
That
on
might
Star
just be
Wars.
you, actually. Honestly.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. That we're all. Everybody has. Again,
I get what you're saying, though.
I do understand what you're saying.
There's this tendency as Americans to think everything over there is a backwater. You know what I
Everything.
mean?
That's what I thought.
Like our view of Kazakhstan, like 100% is off on that country because of a movie by a guy that makes us think that they're all goat herder cousin fuckers. That's what that movie makes us think of Kazakhstan, and it's like one of the most, like they have one city that's the most advanced city I've ever seen.
Did you see this guy that was? I wanted to bring this up when you were talking earlier about us kind of sleepwalking into World War III. Did you see this guy that found Hillary at this event?
I love that.
Oh, and it's just, I mean, we'll not let her rest on this point that we're kind of like stumbling into World War III, and it's I can't find that damn thing, but it was just it's amazing. If you guys haven't seen it,
God, that guy, like, first of all, don't come near me.
Yeah,
dude.
well,
don't stand near me.
Kept wanting to see
don't
him
get in a car with me. Don't talk to me. I stay the fuck away.
Well, she was like, "I'll see you after. I'll see you after."
I might get a restraining order against him just so he can't come near me because I don't want to get Clinton. Suicide. But Isaac, you were going to say something?
Yeah. Well I want to quickly take it over into the realm of the occult symbolism because there's an element there from 9/11 that, you know, some of the audience might be too young to know this, but, you know, George Bush said we should go shopping instead of any kind of public sacrifice.
Right.
Because,
go out there, go shopping, buy some stuff.
But there was this, so that's one level.
The guy on the left looks like the guy from the Big Bang Theory, that sitcom. He looks like him.
But on the other level, you've got the symbolic ritual that they took the 2 towers down, and the 2 towers is the Boaz and Yakin. It was the entrance to Solomon's temple were these 2 pillars. And the idea was that when one entered between these 2 pillars, you were entering the sacred or the mysterious. It was considered a gateway in a sort of way into Solomon's temple, the original first temple. And the theory is that 9/11 symbolically they took the 2 towers down and then raised a single one world tower, which is very much on the nose for what the big agenda is that one world government idea. And what's really fascinating is that in the news you had that guy who, you know, plummeted 30 feet or whatever into the cavities of the 2 twin towers that came down. And you look at it from the idea of Kabbalah, and if you look at the Kabbalistic tree of life, they consider that to have 3 pillars. There's severity and mercy on each side. Those would have been the original 9/11 twin towers. But now we're going up the middle, which is...
Did you see William Lane Craig's interview with Ben Shapiro? It was pretty good.
The Harmony Tower. But all of this arguably is, and this is what I talk about, because I did 2 episodes on the occult symbolism of the apocalypse and what's going on now, because all this stuff goes way back to the occult magicians like John Dee, who was influenced by the Puritans. And, you know, I take a couple hours to go through all these ideas, but he was basically influenced by the Puritans, and he was interested in bringing about the end times because the thoughts were that God needed man to facilitate the return of Christ and the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. So, which I don't agree with. And then even you fast forward to the early 1900s with Aleister Crowley. He was raised inside of the I can't think of the guy's name. John Darby. He's the guy.
Plymouth Brethren.
The Plymouth Brethren. Yeah, the dispensationalist movement. John Nelson Darby is the guy I was thinking of. Crowley was raised inside Darby's own exclusive Brethren group, and he also believed that mankind could bring about the end of the world. Only he approached it from the other side, right? And it's always dual polarities when you're researching this stuff. He approached it from the angle of, hey, I also want to bring about the end times, except I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to be the Antichrist, and I'm going to bring forth this new age, the Aeon of Horus. And it's going to help facilitate this, final destruction of the whatever's over there. I don't want to say terms, but to rebuild the third temple.
I just 100% believe that you're totally onto it, and this is I think this is really what we're looking at right now.
And it goes back through John Dee, because all of my occult research of things that are going on, and John Dee fits into this mold too, because he was an intelligence agent, and the intelligence agencies and the secret societies, they have so many parallels. Richard Spence wrote a book about this idea. Jay Dyer's talked about it a million times. There's parallels in these things, and I can't help but believe that the intelligence agencies, at least the inner sort of, looking at it from like a Russian doll perspective, because I actually know a guy who is in one of these, intelligence agencies, and he just does like badass hero shit, man. He doesn't know what's going on in the inner circles. The inner circles, they are making big chess moves, and I think that they got a lot of ideas from the secret societies on how to do that, and they kind of work hand in hand. Aleister Crowley, also an intelligence agent. So
yes,
all of these things I think is coordinated because they want.
I never knew that. Aleister Crowley was an intelligence officer. I never knew that.
Bring about this ritualistic theater of bringing back Christ, which I always say, it's like, I don't think God needs mankind to do what he wants to do, right? But some people do believe that.
Hey guys, are you guys looking for a new podcast? Well, I got a good one for you. Mr. Ballin's Medical Mysteries. That's right. We've all been there, turning to the internet to sell.
Don't care for his promotions.
Who moved to a new neighborhood, realize that something's up, and realize they have superpowers. One can transform into a bear, and the other one can transform into any bird they want, and they fight the deep state in their neighborhood. Each house is a different conspiracy they're going to bear. It's a great way to teach your kids about conspiracies while having fun at the same time. And it's all you have to do is go to chaostwins.com or thechaostwins.com or even samtripoli.com and click the banner. But go there, click it, and get on the mailing list. And if you can join us, it'd be really great. We appreciate you, and just check it out, chaostwins.com. Now let's get back to the show. Jay, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think this might, with your religious background, fit right into some of the stuff that you've been studying. I would 100% believe exactly what Isaac's saying. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a perfect tie-in to go from what we were talking about with thesis, antithesis, synthesis of dialectics to what Isaac was talking about with the two pillars, mercy and severity. I've drawn us a helpful little diagram here.
Oh, look at that.
To show you.
Hold on, who's that guy down there with the hat?
That's a soy-faced, mind-blown Sam Tripoli.
Okay, man.
And then we got. So look, the pillar of mercy and left, right versus the pillar of severity and right wing.
Yeah.
And what do you get out of that? You get the synthesis, which is produced by the two pillars, right? That's the same thing as Hegel. And if you think that's crazy, in the academic world, they've actually studied Hegel and found out that he had Hermetic roots. There's a famous academic text called Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. And you'll notice the triangles here. This is all like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, producing another triangle, which produces another triangle. Same principle as what Isaac was talking about with Kabbalism and John Dee and all that. It's all from this kind of process philosophy, which is this technique of ruling people. And it's how you divide. It's the basic principles of how you divide and conquer. You just got to control those two groups. One last point that I wanted to mention on. If you remember the famous book Tragedy and Hope,
Yes.
Sam, you said that the Hitler and the Nazis didn't necessarily lose World War II. The reason for that is because they were actually aided, funded, and propped up by British intelligence. In fact, Quigley has 2 chapters in the middle of the book where he talks about British intelligence goading and promising Hitler through secret backdoor deals that if he invaded Poland, they wouldn't do anything, and they didn't. And so publicly they were condemning him. Privately they were saying, go into Poland, start World War II. They even gave him $1 billion worth of Czech gold that he had already divided up with the Western powers. So they had already divided up Czech gold.
I never knew that, but I did know George Bush Sr.'s father. I think his name was Prescott Bush. They were going to charge him for aiding and abetting the enemy with the Nazi Germans. Apparently they were going to try him for treason, but he got out of it.
UK gave Hitler $1 billion. When he invaded, they didn't help Poland. And so the Allies just allowed him, through this elite British Milner circle control, the start of World War II. Again, and it doesn't even have to be a dialectic. It could be a trialectic to where, let me read you this real quick. Allen Dulles was the brother of the Secretary of State. He was the director of Schroeder Bank in New York and an old associate of a guy named Frank Tiarks, partner in the Schroeder Bank of London since 1902, a director of the Bank of England. Sam, you're spot on when you were talking about Bank of England, as well as at Lazar Brothers Bank and the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. It was the Schroeder Bank in Cologne that helped to arrange the rise of Hitler to power.
Shawnee, good night. God bless.
So Allen Dulles was the director at the bank that brought Hitler to power. So the same elite banking structure funded the Bolsheviks, funded the rise of Hitler
100%.
And the Cold War.
100%, man. And
okay, I read a book on Hitler's economic miracle before World War II, and there was no miracle. He got the money from the elites like the Rothschilds and that. And the deal was he told them he won't go to war till 1949, but they pushed him early to go to war, and that's why he went in 1939. That's why he couldn't take Russia. He wasn't prepared, but they were pressing him for their money back.
Question is, why Hitler? Why, and then we get into, is he a Rothschild? Is he by birth is he a bastard? Almost in this weird kind of Jon Snow kind of way, like this bizarro Game of Thrones Jon Snow kind of way.
World War II, you needed a big, huge European conflict to have the justification for the United Nations. The first, World War I produced League of Nations, but it failed to be a successful world government. World War II produced United Nations, which was a proto-world government, but it's still never really been what they wanted it to be. And so the Cold War was also a managed dialectic to help produce this global governance. And so, that didn't really occur totally, but it may require a World War III to have a full-on world government.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, all this stuff, it's the same people behind it all. And people just
that's why we've got disclosure too. That's why the UFO disclosure thing is where it's at right now too.
Why? Well, explain.
Because that's Ronald Reagan first. He's got a famous quote about how we would all come together if there was a extraterrestrial threat of some kind, and it's just bizarre.
Diane, I want to be careful going after people who say the election was rigged, because we know damn well it was. And I reckon when Trump gets in court to defend himself, they won't like it because he's got the goods.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around why all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, I feel like there's a plan that got enacted starting around 2017 when the New York Times first talked about ATIP and these videos from the Navy pilots and stuff. Why are they trying to do a 180 about face on UFOs and aliens, and they're rebranding it, which is rebranding terms is the first stage of propaganda. They're like, no, it's UAP, because they know that they've spent 70, 80 years drilling it into the minds of the masses, like, oh, there's nothing to see here, even though they're studying it and they're researching it and they got all these people that are experts on it and they're still investigating crashes and stuff. They sit there and say, oh, there's nothing going on here. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, there was something going on here, and turns out we've been researching it. But then everybody's in the dark, supposedly. They have these congressional hearings, and it's goofy because you can watch the interviews with David Fravor, David Grush on Joe Rogan and stuff, and you learn more about what happened than at the congressional hearings. They don't really get to the bottom of anything, and no one seems to know anything. And it's all very bizarre. Like David Grush, he's the latest whistleblower type, and he did that congressional hearing. And Jeremy Corbell was in the front row, so was George Knapp, and they grilled him, and he kept saying to him, like, look, I can't release this information unless we're in a skiff. If we get into a skiff, I'll tell you all these things that you're asking me questions about. And you would think that Congress would say, oh, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and get in that skiff because I want to learn about the aliens. But did they schedule a skiff meeting with them? No, they did not. So I don't know why the public theater and the 180. And the best idea I could come up with was I wrote a book called The Dark Path in 2016 or 17, before the New York Times thing broke. And in it, I talked about the UFO agenda and the aliens and stuff like that. And NASA, the chief scientist of NASA, was telling us that by the year 2025, they're going to prove the existence of extraterrestrials or aliens or whatever you want to call it. And I think they're on course to do that. And if you want the short version of how I think this is going to turn out, David Grush mentioned a couple times about how there's a quantum physics angle to the phenomenon that they call it. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. They have to find a way to explain to the normies, to the masses, that, hey, there's not these beings coming from planet Mars. These things are entities that exist in another dimension. This is the ultra terrestrials that John Keel talked about 50 years ago. And the truther movement has been aware of these things for so long. And I think that's part of the reason why the PSYOP happened, to sort of get people to think that, you're a conspiracy theorist, you believe in flat Earth, don't you? And all these crazy things, because they need to sort of control the argument. And it just seems like everything's coming to a head in the next 10 to 15 years between alien disclosure, possible totalitarian technocracy, and the technology singularity. And I think from a spiritual perspective, they know that we're in this cycle, and they're trying to facilitate the ending that they want. And they being, of course, the supposed Illuminati.
We've seen stories recently that people in the Pentagon and in the UK government are afraid to pursue this further disclosure and investigating these entities because they think that they may well be demons. What do you think about that? Do you think that's legitimate, or is that meant to?
Yeah,
you do.
Yeah, totally. Because if you research, Nick Redfern wrote a book about this, about how there's a group called the Collins Elite. I can't think of the name of his source. I want to say it was Ray Boucher, but I could be way off on that. I wrote about it in my 2 alien books. But the Collins Elite, as the legend goes, back in the 40s, when there was a crash at the Trinity site where they did the atomic bomb testing within a week after the atomic, I think it was maybe the same week that they tested the atomic bomb. And it was an actual crash, actual witnesses, actual evidence. Then in 47, of course, we had Roswell. And then in between that, you had Jack Parsons doing the Aleister Crowley ritual for the Babylon working, which was a sort of a modified ritual from what he called the Amalantra working, where in 1917 he channeled the first gray alien lamb. But anyway, in the 40s, the intelligence agencies and the Pentagon, the DOD, whatever this group was, the Collins Elite was attached to, they were investigating all this extraterrestrial activity, and they understood that Jack Parsons was calling himself the Antichrist and doing magic rituals and doing all this occult stuff. And especially back in the 40s and 50s, it was a much more sort of devout sort of Christian perspective in our country, I would say. And they were from that camp. And even as a Greek Orthodox member, Father Seraphim Rose, he called all this stuff out 40, 50, 60 years ago. Jay knows what I'm talking about. It's always been a part of the Orthodox perspective, is to understand that we are in the end times, and there's a push to have a one world government, and there's all this sort of occult aspects to it. But the Collins Elite was apparently talking to the Department of Defense, and they were researching it, and they kept telling because the Department of Defense, they said, hey, this is pretty wild. We might be able to sort of garner some technology and make a really cool super weapon and, obliterate any enemy with this cool technology. But then the Collins Elite was kind of showing up and saying, hey, pump the brakes. Like, these guys are talking to demons and devils and all this crazy stuff and doing occult practices. And from the way I understand it, over the years, that voice of the Collins Elite has diminished in power and respect. And in the last 30 years, you hear Lou Elizondo and Nick Pope, they've talked about this on record of saying, yeah, they don't say the Collins Elite, but they'll say, yeah, there was a group within the Pentagon who was this voice of trying to shut down research into the phenomenon because they thought they were channeling the devil, ha, ha, ha. And that's precisely what's been going on. So I don't know. I don't know where that takes us, if they're really talking to demons and angels or not. Clearly, I've never done it.
I'm so getting into this, and so I'm glad Jay's here too, because he can break down that question you have right now, which is, like how much of this is biblical? Well, how much are these people like they push atheism and all that state and communism, but at the highest levels, how much are they into this biblical end of days times? And it's like, as I study this stuff, like I love this, I love it. I'm really in this kind of weird place right now where I'm into Jesus, God is above all. But I also understand, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I understand energy manipulation and abundance and all that stuff and what that represents. And
it doesn't hurt to know the deeper things. Yeah, I quite agree with you.
And then I'm like, are all these pagan gods fallen angels and Nephilim and all that stuff? And there's a part of me that really believes that's starting to really get into that. And then are these aliens just demons and angels? And we just, like Crowley would say, they would show up again, but they would come under a different name, which is UFOs, I believe. So, what are your thoughts on what's going on right now, Jay, from an Orthodox point of view?
Yeah, not just from Orthodox point of view, but my own direct experience. I had a lot of two bad trips when I was young. The first one, I did interact with an entity. So I do understand how people come to believe that and think that and experience that. I mean, I experienced it. I just was interacting with basically a point of light when I had a really intense LSD trip the first time I did it when I was, I think, 17. And I came away from that experience knowing that I interacted with something conscious, but I didn't remember any, astounding revelations or anything like that. I felt bad. It felt kind of weird and dirty afterwards. I don't know, it was something synthetic. I don't mean dirty in a sexual way. I just mean synthetic. And it didn't seem like an authentic, positive spiritual experience, what I'm trying to say. So, and I think a lot of people who do DMT and all this kind of stuff, they have similar experiences of you do interact with something conscious on a spiritual plane. So I think all that's very real. And I think that the commonality between what people think aliens are saying and what people think the Clockwork Elves and the DMT entities and all that, it's always the same message, right? It's like, start a world government, kill everybody, where your friends will love you, right? It's always it's the same message every time.
A lot of gay robots out there.
Exactly. Yeah, they want to touch butts. They want to, do that kind of stuff. But also, I remember reading some of the psychonauts, right? Like you read Tim Leary, or if you read John C. Lilly, the weirdo that had a fascination for dolphins and all that. They were doing similar experiments with the float tanks and all of that, and they would dissociate in their acid trips and in their ketamine trips, their DMT trips, and they also claim that we were always getting ideas from the entities when we were doing these dissociative, hardcore, hallucinogen trips. So I think that's very possible, and I think that that people think they're interacting with gods or these things, and they're actually interacting with the demonic in our view, and that's why the message is typically the same. They might appear, like you said, Sam, as one deity appears to one culture as a weird masked entity that in another culture it's a different deity, but it's basically the same thing. We're in different masks. Does that make sense? What I'm saying,
yes.
Like the Greek gods is the same as the Roman gods, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think that's what the gods are. These these ancient aliens, so to speak. They're just demonic entities that always want to try to tell people to depopulate, create a world government. And that's the key sign that it's something nefarious. It's not actually, you know, giving human beings a good positive message. And like Isaac said, you got, you know, Sarah from Rose's book, Orthodox and the Religion of the Future, that he wrote 40, 50 years ago, was basically saying all the same stuff, saying that it's demonic. They're going to try to call for a world government, and then here we are, and they're doing it.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm reading the Bible. You know, I'm pretty much through Genesis right now. Super interesting, and it's like thinking like, I'm not like a weirdo. I'm just biblical. That's why I'm a biblical character in Genesis.
You kind of wish you would have read it before.
A long time ago?
Yeah, like
no, because I don't think I was ready for it. I think I would dismiss everything because I didn't have an understanding. It was like I feel you have to be open to its message and God, and you have to have God to be able to read that. Because if you don't have God and you read Genesis, you go, everybody here is fucked up. You know, I hate to say it, but they're all like outcasts and misfits. I mean, one chick can't have a baby, so she tells her husband to bang the maid, and then Eve is for the streets and she's eating apples. Did she bang a lizard and have cancer? Like, there's so much shit going on in Genesis. You're like, I'm not like I'm in AA, but maybe I'm just like I'm a biblical character born the wrong time.
Diane, I've been following Mike Johnson and his impeachment. Oh man, it's really going to happen. Okay, this is what will happen. They'll go to war before they let Biden be impeached. I think they'll go to war before they let that happen. Because Mike Johnson, he's got all the goods. I've been following this so closely. Oh, yeehaw. Geez, I hope he goes down for treason.
I don't know, man, but so it's like a really interesting thing. But I jumped to Revelations, and then there's some heavy shit in there, and I'm reading that right now too. And like, are we in biblical times, do you think, right now, Jay, based on your studying of the Bible and all that stuff?
I mean, I think it would be presumptuous of me to say that I know for sure. I think there's a lot of indicators that it's possible. I think that every time we see in history, the movement of this world, it's always towards a single world government. You have that with the Tower of Babel. Then you have all the successive empires in the Old Testament, for example, Egypt, Babylon, Persia, right? They're always doing the same thing. And then Rome is a kind of that final empire under which the Messiah would be born, according to Daniel 2 and 7 and 9. So you get this constant movement towards the creation of a single global government. And then you get the establishment of the kingdom of God, which in the New Testament is the church, that is that new kingdom that's set up to be the displacement of this world system, which is, as you said, under these demonic entities. So basically you have the presentation that all those world empires were serving these gods or these entities.
Are those the animals you're talking about, the different animals that lead up to the animal with the 10 heads and 90 horns or whatever that is? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the beast. You're talking about the beast.
Yeah. Do you think is that along the lines of what you're talking about?
Those are just basically references for these beastly world empires,
yes,
right? So that they act as a kind of a, symbolically speaking, they act as beasts, but they actually are serving spiritual entities, right? Moses wrote that the gods of the nations are devils, so that the nations are basically serving these demonic forces, which are the fallen angels. And that's why they always have the same kinds of weird practices going on, right? Like a lot of butt stuff, a lot of seminal fluid stuff, a lot of human sacrifice. That's universal because it's the same entities requiring that. And then you get the reversal of that with the coming of the Messiah and all that. But as to whether we're in the end times, I'm not sure, but it's the same spirit, the same system. So the beast system is the same system as Babylon all the way back to the Tower of Babel, right? So it's the same movement of let's get all the human beings under one Tower of Babel, speaking one controlled system, one language, one controlled economic system. It's that same movement. And that's what I think Revelation is talking about. Whether we're in that last days, I don't know, but we definitely see that beast system there.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, and like how everybody is so quick to jump on either side. is just shocking to me. And like how they throw out everything they've been talking about, preaching about, throw it out the door for this biblical end of days. But as like Jay, this gets into the weird and like dangerous conversations. But as I study the end in Revelations, they talk about synagogues of Satan. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that if you're talking about the continuation of rabbinic Judaism, I think that they still, in a sense, do have a claim to being God's people and Abraham's seed. Paul answers this question in, I think, Romans 3, where he says they do have the gifts and calling of God, but if they reject the Messiah, then they're not in the church. The church is the spiritual Israel, according to Paul in Galatians in the New Testament. So Israel was a type. It was fulfilled when the church came. The church is the fulfillment of what Israel
What church
was.
are we talking about?
Well, I believe it's the Orthodox Church, but I'm just saying when in the first century you get the church set up when Jesus comes, right? So if you read Matthew 16, he says to Peter, "On this rock I'll build my church." And then you get, after the New Testament is complete, you get the churches in the Roman Empire. That makes up the New Testament church. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well,
so that's Christianity begins to spread throughout the Roman Empire and then continues on to where we are today. That's the history of the Christian church. But what I'm saying is that it's a fulfillment of Israel, and there's a lot of prophecies and mentionings, for example, Romans 11, where eventually Jews will convert and accept Christianity. But Paul says when that is in God's providence, we don't know. But the likelihood, I think, is that there will be an attempt at, building a new temple and all this kind of stuff, which I think ultimately is Antichrist in my view. And that's the Orthodox view, is that that's not of God to build a new temple. We don't need animal sacrifices. That's all fulfilled. So that if you read the book of Hebrews, to rebuild the temple would be to act against the work of Christ, which fulfills the animal sacrifice.
Interesting, right? That's so interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's anti-Semitic too, because the evangelicals that I got in trouble because I labeled them all in one brush stroke, but the evangelicals who believe in the Christian Zionist stuff, who say, "Oh, we need to build the third temple so we can bring Christ back and get this rapture thing going."
Yeah, bugger the third temple. We don't want a third temple going up. That's not good for us.
Get the party started.
They want that because it's very anti-Semitic, because they think that once the Christ comes back, then the Jewish people will understand the error of their ways and say, "Oh my goodness, we were wrong the whole time, and yes, now we are converting to Christianity." And so in a way, and from what I understand, the people of Israel, they need the American, military power and money and all this stuff that we give to them. But then on the one hand, but then on the other hand, they say, but they're kind of anti-Semitic because they think that we're all wrong, but they just kind of deal with it, right? But I want to talk about the Book of Revelation, because the Orthodoxy there's like an email newsletter where they would send you the daily readings, and I read them for years on email, and I asked my priest, I said, "Hey, we do all the New Testament, but we never talk about the Book of Revelation. Why not that? Because that's kind of the most interesting one, right?" And he said, and he simplified it for my mere mortal brain to understand. And he basically was saying, "Look, we don't put a lot of stock into the Book of Revelation. The point is like you should always be ready for Christ's return."
Wow, so don't take the Book of Revelation seriously.
And then if you research a little deeper, I think this gets too in the weeds, but I think John of Patmos, who wrote it, was like a Jewish guy who converted, and I guess they had beef with him because he wasn't one of the pagans that converted to the early church. I don't know the details, but Metropolitan Isaiah, he wrote a piece about the end times, and he talked about how 9/11 happened on the first month of the first year of the third millennium, if you look at it from the church's ecclesiastical calendar. So there was there's more sort of ritualistic ideas embedded in there if you want to go with the idea that it was an inside job and allowed to happen. And I've got he has this really long article talking about the end times, and he talks, I'll try to paraphrase the last little bit here. He said that it's the beginning of a new world condition. He said we're going to see the great industrial powers of the world unifying to create a giant industrial, technological, and scientific complex controlled by fewer and fewer people, an oligarchy of power and control.
Yeah.
Technology and microchips being put into every single object, including the bodies of children. Let's see, and they basically talk about how the Orthodox monks for years have been talking about how we need to prepare for the one world government with a one world ruler. So I mean, there's a sort of Metropolitan Isaiah. He's a big dog in the Greek Orthodox Church. So yeah, he basically laid it out with that idea too. And I see all the parallels with the conspiracy world, and I think, man, there's got to be some truth here. Everyone's pointing to the same things.
Yeah, I agree. It's just interesting that there's so much biblical implications here, and then there's just a lot of people who don't want to follow. I mean, study of Noah, his children, his lineage. It's like, to me, it's there, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm new to it, and I read it, and I think there's some weird lineage there, and like everything's bloodlines to these elites. Like the bloodlines are the most important thing to them, and so I find it interesting. And it makes me sad, man, because again, I am a spiritual man and I believe in Christ and I got God in my life, and my life has been incredibly, I'm living such a wonderful life, and I'm blessed to have a show that does well with fans that are, I couldn't ask for better fans in the world. And it just makes me like really weirded out right now about what's going on and how quickly people turn on their own basic morals and values. How quickly, like even when COVID came out, how there were so many anti-government people that just turned around and was like, no, we need mandatory vaccines. You're like, dude, 2 weeks ago you were screaming about too much of the power of the government. I mean, what are we talking about here? And it's scary how people can flip on that stuff, and it's scary how, I don't know, some lives are worth more than other lives. That makes me really sad too. And it's just like that people just want this. It's almost like these old fucks just want this to come so quickly while they're still alive. They put all their essence into this brand, and they see the end coming. They're like, okay, we gotta wrap it up. Let's go. Let's go. I don't know the days. I only got a couple more days left. Let's go.
So a lot of the narrative has been that this war isn't because of religion; it's because of them, of land and occupancy, about them not letting them live there without borders and stuff. Is this to demonize religion and how it's just about land and don't worry about the religion? It's not about Christians, it's not about Muslims, it's not about the Jews.
But I think it is all about that.
I know, but you go on TikTok and a lot of it's supposed to be just about them being in their territory. As in, they just want them out. It has nothing to do with being Jews.
Well, TikTok tends to be younger kids that don't know anything.
Is that the narrative there? Is it to push and demonize and make it seem like church isn't important?
I mean, China is atheist, so I wouldn't doubt if that's what gets magnified on there. And I've said this a bunch of times. The only thing 20-year-olds are good for is banging, and that's it. I don't want to hear any political talk from you. You've lived no life, and you're coming out of a time when everybody worked their ass off to protect you from the consequences of your actions.
We used to say young, dumb, and full of cum.
Yeah, that's really all it is. Either way, too. Either you're a guy or a girl. Either way, So I mean,
well, Sam, wait till you get to the Book of Leviticus, man. You're gonna be real bummed out. You can't eat shellfish, and you can't do butt stuff, and nothing fun, man.
Yeah, I'm in trouble. I mean, but I feel like if you repent, you get it. Now, I can't eat sushi. I can't eat any sushi. Is that
the rule?
I don't know. I thought Christ came and we
the Old Testament, right?
Yeah, Christ came and was like,
okay, Peter got a vision of a sheet coming down with produce on it, like cows and vegetables and pigs, and he was told use everything, like eat everything. And Jesus also said, don't be concerned what goes in your mouth, be concerned with what comes out your mouth. So they're not right here. These guys are wrong on a few biblical points, I noticed, but it's not blasphemy wrong.
Hey, we're changing the rules.
Yeah, let's mix it up here.
The new covenant.
I like California rolls, okay? If you eat a California roll with some edamame, you can get in there. Guys, thank you so much for coming in. And I personally believe right now I'm going to end that out. Thank you guys for coming. I think the war pigs are losing the information war.
I'm actually streaming.
I think more and more people are waking up that this is a false flag event and driving us to war. And I am anti-war. I'm pro-Christian. I'm anti-war. I'm not anti-Muslim. I'm not anti-Judaism at all. It's all Abrahamic to me, and everyone has their own views. And as long as you treat people with love and respect, I respect everybody's views. But I'm not going to let these war pigs last into another war. And maybe maybe nothing I can do about it. But
good night, Jay. Good night,
swinging. And that's really what these shows are about. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This conversation was insanely awesome. This is why you guys are so loved on the show. So one more time, can you guys please tell us where they can find you? We'll go with Jay first and Isaac.
Yeah, you can
Okay, guys, I'm out as well.
find me on YouTube, just under my name, Jay Dyer. You can find me on Rockfin under Jay Dyer as well. And then on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else, same stuff, same name. And then every Friday, 4th hour